good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to all board members, members of the press and members of the public to the first of our two Overview and Scrutiny board meetings today on Monday the 10th of February here at the Civic Centre in Bournemouth. I will pass over to Claire for some housekeeping. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note that this Overview and Scrutiny board meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the Council's website in due course. Please could I remind councillors and officers to use their microphones when speaking. The meeting may also be audio recorded or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. Please note that this meeting room is fitted with an induction loop for the benefit of hearing aid users. Hearing aids should be switched to the T setting. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests. If the alarm does go off, please leave the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route. Finally, please could mobile phones be turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you. First item on the agenda is apologies. We have received apologies from Councillor Mark Anderson and Councillor Pete Miles. Second item, substitute members, and we have received notification from the appropriate group leader or their nominated representative that Councillor Hazel Allen will be substituting for Councillor Anderson. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any registrable local interest in any items on the agenda?
Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. As I understand it, I have 3 declarations of interest to declare. The first one, I believe there is a statement to be read out on behalf of my wife, who represents Dorset Equality Group, of which I am not a member, but it's my wife's statement, so that's a personal interest. The other 2 are local interest declarations, one as chair of the Broadstone Neighbourhood Forum, and that relates, I believe, to item 8 on the agenda, the still document. I will take part in that issue with general comments and statements. And the final declaration is that I'm a board member of BDC, which is item 10, I believe, on the agenda. I will not be taking part at all in the discussions on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke. Are there any further declarations of interest? Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have no pecuniary interests of note. There we go. But I would like just to thank the Chair for ensuring that the maintaining and promoting high standards of conduct and declaring interests at meetings was included with the papers this time round. Reading through it, then I'd just like a little bit of guidance from the Chair as regards ward councillors that, based upon business item number 8, I'm sure that a lot of us involve ourselves with the neighbourhood forums to a greater or lesser degree. And I just wanted to have a little bit of guidance as regards how that might affect the councillor's predetermination or bias when talking about the options in business item number 8.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I will seek guidance from the monitoring officer. I don't think it precludes us taking part in the discussion, but Tanya, if you could have some guidance.
Thank you, Chairman. That's correct. I think there's a formal local interest to declare if you're chair of one of the organised neighbourhood forums, as Councillor Brooke has done, and that doesn't preclude you taking part in the meeting today. And there may be another interest for transparency purposes that other members want to disclose if they are actively involved in those neighbourhood forums or other forums that are involved in the applications for SIL and have that sort of engagement. But there's no reason not to take part in the meeting today as a result of that. I hope that clarifies that for you, Chairman.
So on that note, any further declarations of interest? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The 4th item is the confirmation of minutes from previous meetings, and we have the minutes from the meetings held at 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. on the 18th of December, and the meetings held at 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. on the 13th of January for confirmation.
Thank you, which takes us to item 4A, which is the actions... Oh, sorry, Councillor Green.
Chairman, regarding the minutes, although they are accepted, may I make note that I feel that they do not sufficiently reflect the tone or some of the content and emphasis at the meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Duly noted. Moving on to agenda item 4A, which is the action sheet which we have to consider. We haven't been keeping we haven't had a number of meetings to pull all of this out, but I just thought I would draw one item out of the action sheet which tracks our decisions, actions and outcomes, so we keep this up to date regularly, showing that if we are making observations or recommendations from the board, it gives us an ability to A, note them, and B, find out what's happened with them and if necessary any further outcomes. So it is listed as the items, the actions, the benefits and the outcome. On page 36, just to draw out, there was a resolution at the Overview and Scrutiny Board around the call for evidence of 5G connectivity, that our evidence base and all of our findings were passed to Public Health England. And just to draw board members' attention to the outcome of that, which we did receive a response from Public Health England that advised that having reviewed the evidence submitted by the public, they concluded that there was nothing new that would cause Public Health England to revise its current position. So that was one that I thought it would be worth bringing back to the board, because it was a specific recommendation that we put it to. There are obviously the rest of the outcomes and actions from the board in particular in the last meetings. Do any board members have any comments or points that they wish to raise on the items in the action sheet? Nope. If not, if we're all happy, and we'll take that as read. Agreed? Thank you very much. That moves us on to item number 5, which is the chairman's update, which has been put there just to bring forward any items that aren't on the rest of the agenda paper, and just to alert board members to anything that I think we need to be aware of. The first is that we have all altered slightly the order of business for today's meeting, so that the item which is item 9, which was due to be second, it has now been moved to the end of the agenda. So that's around the corporate strategy delivery plans. Second, I welcome guidance from the board on meeting locations in the future. We have now got the calendar of meetings set through via full council for the next municipal year for the board. What we haven't done is set in any locations for those board meetings. To date, we have been moving them, around availability of rooms, but B, around the difficult geographical locations. There are pros and cons to each of the locations, and pros and cons to that method of working it. So I just wanted to take the temperature from the board about where we should be based in the future. We do have the option to say we want to be in one place if we wanted to do that. So, for instance, we could say that we want all further board meetings to be in Bournemouth because it's in the middle. We could say that we wish all further board meetings to be in Christchurch because it is probably more accessible for more members of the public and has the additional benefit of being video recorded as well, so it might get to a wider audience. Or we could indeed keep to what we've already been doing. So I just wondered whether any particular preference from members of the board. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I won't, go for a preference, but I will say that the planning committee had this debate, and they've elected to hold, because it's a central location, to hold their meetings in the town hall here. Apart from one, I think all those meetings are now scheduled here, and because the overall view was that it was actually better in overall terms for people to get here, particularly at the time. The timings of the meetings were fairly critical too, in terms of the traffic at certain times of the day. So anyway, that's what the planning committee had decided to do.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I was actually present at the planning board on that one. I think the decision was very well made for that. The difference between ourselves and planning is that on planning, they really don't know what the agenda items are going to be until fairly close to the last minute, whereas we do. And that was the reason why on planning, even though the decision was taken to come to Bournemouth, there was a slight hesitation, because it might be that the members of the public who are likely to turn up for a particular item were from Christchurch or from Poole. Now that's something that we will know in advance, or likely to know in advance, for this meeting. So I wonder whether it would be sensible to say, let's go for the central location in Bournemouth. However, if it looks in advance as though there is likely to be particular interest from Christchurch residents or Poole residents for a specific item, then we look to see whether there is a room free in Christchurch or Poole which will accommodate us at that time, and so be prepared to switch.
Thank you. Councillor Iyengar.
I'd prefer the latter point that Councillor Green made to be actually the main point in my view, which is that I think it shows a nice inclusivity, it's a nice touch, where if the agenda, I'm mindful there are many items on the agenda for every meeting, if the agenda is particularly Christchurch-centric or Poole-centric and likely to generate a particular interest from a certain part of the conurbation, I think we can show it's a nice touch, therefore, to have the meeting where it suits those residents best.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
I echo those comments. The concern that I have is that the contacting or reaching out to the public, then obviously the video facilities which are available and put online at Christchurch came into great effect, particularly as you mentioned earlier with the call for evidence on 5G, allowed people to review our meetings and in fact any committee meetings. The other difficulty which I've got with going firm on Bournemouth is that we don't have CCTV, which is the way to engage as far as I'm concerned. But two, the accessibility. We don't have a very structured plan, and it puts a lot of strain on our facility staff to ensure that the different doors are manned so that people that have accessibility needs can actually be guided up through the building through a variety of security checks. So unless we had a sort of a coherent plan as regards an accessible room whereby a video link can be put up, then we are excluding, to my opinion, those which have accessibility needs that want to actually attend meetings.
Thank you. Tanya.
Thank you, Jess. I just wanted to clarify the issue about streaming and filming. I think there are probably two issues, as you've mentioned. One of the issues is recording the meeting as it's going ahead for showing in an adjacent room, which I think is what happened during the 5G call for evidence at Christchurch, and that indeed could happen here. It could happen in Poole, as I understand it. That's the ongoing, potentially, we'd have to look at that. But certainly it's happened here and it's happened in Christchurch. The second issue, just to avoid any misunderstanding, we're not live streaming any meetings at all. Although there's a facility at Christchurch, in order to be consistent across the board, we're audio recording every meeting and publishing it on the website. But we're not actually live streaming onto the web any meetings at all, whether in Christchurch or elsewhere.
Without wishing to talk about this all day, then, are we happy essentially to continue as is, to, broadly speaking, move about where we think is necessary, but try and base predominantly in the central, unless there is a pressing need for otherwise? Are all board members happy with that? Yeah. Great, thank you very much. A few other items I just wish to bring to the board's attention. We aren't able to consider everything at the Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting, particularly related to cabinet-related items. So we are necessarily a bit more picky than we might like to be. However, there was one particular item on the Cabinet Forward Plan which we chose not to scrutinise here, which is the Carter Expansion Project Update item, which is predominantly around children's services. Now, although it is a children's services item, which I would suggest we recommend that Children's Services continue to maintain an overview of the project, there is a financial element of this strategy. So I just wondered whether, rather than trying to have two separate meetings both considering the same thing, whether we wish to select somebody or volunteer somebody from this board who can essentially maintain an overview of the finance element of that project and then report back to this board if that was, if there were any concerns there, and whether I had any volunteers wishing to do that. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I do love a good schools capital project, and I think I would be very happy to take that role on, conscious that there is a specific angle to it from this board, and to report back and to liaise perhaps with you and Democratic Services in the best way to do that, if there are no other volunteers.
And Councillor Brooke.
As a member of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Board, I'd be more than happy to report back as well, without the need for anyone else to attend if they do not wish to.
Great, I sense a working relationship forming. So perhaps if there are no extra volunteers, if we are happy, essentially it is to make sure that we do our job at scrutiny, because there is a danger, of course, at the Children's Services looking at the service itself rather than the risk elements which we tend to focus on here. So in that case, I'd welcome both of you keeping an eye on that and then reporting back to the board if and when. Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. I can assure you that in the past the Children's Services Board has scrutinised the finances of school expansions very, very closely indeed and made significant changes to budgets and so on. So I don't think that would really be a problem.
Which will make your job easier. So great, it just ticks a box. So thank you very much to both of you. Just the final point from me is, as with all of our meetings, a kind of a reminder, if you like, that there are a number of us on this board, and it would be great to hear from as many of you as possible on all of the items, positive, negative. There are no stupid questions, so if there are something that doesn't make sense on paper, do feel free to jump in where necessary, and that includes the substitutes that we may have as well. I think there are some people that maybe think, oh, if I'm not a subject expert on this, I shouldn't say anything. There are no silly questions, so I look forward to engagement or questions from as many as possible, whether you like it or not. So that will move us on to item number 6, which is public speaking, and I'll pass over to Claire. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just to confirm, we haven't received any public questions or petitions for this meeting. But as Councillor Brooke mentioned, we have received a public statement from Annette Brooke, a BCP resident. In her absence, I'm going to read out the statement on her behalf. So this is a short statement on the report being presented at the Overview and Scrutiny Board today and to the Cabinet on Wednesday. This is from the Dorset Equality Group. DEG is a group of Dorset-based people who work to raise awareness of inequality, to promote social justice and to campaign for greater equality. The group is politically non-aligned. DEG welcomes BCP taking a unified approach to CIL across the 3 previous separate councils. We broadly support option 2, which provides opportunities for bids to be submitted to the central pot from community groups in wards with deprivation and needs, but perhaps without the level of development experienced in more advantaged wards. However, we do feel it is important that all the processes of allocating CIL accord with fundamental principles of fairness, openness, transparency, accessibility, good community engagement and strong evidence of community ownership of any proposed project. Selected projects should be financially sustainable, meet the highest environmental standards, and equality principles should be applied. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. That will feed into item 9 on our agenda, so something to consider when we get to that item. So that moves us into the main agenda items, the first of which is item 7, Business Improvement Districts. A reminder for those members of the public or indeed board members that were not present at the last meeting, there are a number of issues, as we all know, around our business communities, and we're quite fortunate in our area to have 3 and potentially soon to have 4 business improvement districts, and these bids are essentially paid for by the levy payers for business rates, and they are very separate from the council, a way for specific areas to engage with and encourage actions within those very specific business communities, predominantly around retail and high streets. Preceding councils have regularly had feedback and updates from the bids as what they're up to, issues which are of concern for them, and indeed I think in the very last Cabinet in Bournemouth we had a update which is almost exactly a year ago from the Bournemouth Town Centre bid, and these are completely objective views, so it's quite often a way to hear from the outside representatives of the business community in particular of what's going on and any concerns that they may wish to bring to our attention. So that the purpose of this item is to hear from each of the 3 bids that we've currently got in place, very much not around what you do or what a bid is, but very much issues on the ground at the moment that you may feel that we need to be aware of. So we've got 3 bid representatives today. I'd invite the first one, which will be the Bournemouth Town Centre bid. I believe we have Martin Davies, who's the chairman, and Paul Kimvig, who is the bid manager. What I'm suggesting and with the board's approval is that if we give each of the various representatives something around 10 minutes to give us a bit of presentation, a bit of an outline of their views of the world and anything that they wish for us to be aware of, and then we can open each one individually into questions before we invite the next bid members up. So I'll welcome Martin and Paul to the table. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm not timing it, because if it's really interesting, you can... No, we'll try and keep it... I've met we know Paul, so we will try and definitely keep it condensed. But no. So I will open it up to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us.
That one. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting us. Town Centre bid from our AGM in November going forward had 3 themes for the forthcoming year, which, by a strange coincidence or otherwise, have come together in a perfect storm over Christmas. It's within our safe and secure sector, we have the ongoing issues of rough sleeping, but more particularly antisocial behaviour and aggressive begging within the town centre. We have undertaken, on behalf of our levy payers for the year going forward, to campaign and speak out and become more vocal on the issue of the reform of business rates, which I appreciate is, despite everything one might see in the press, to a degree to BCP an issue of academic rather than practical importance, because it is ultimately, I think, an issue of national policy and national government rather than something that's within the gift of BCP. And the third area of concern to the bid and to our levy payers going forward has been the high street problems the high street have faced, which are fairly well documented. And to look at the way things have gone and the news and the developments over the last 3 months, one could be forgiven for thinking that Bournemouth and Bournemouth High Street are in some sort of nosediving critical decline, and that somewhere between us and you or somebody else within the town, a magic wand needs to be waved and solutions need to be found. And we have done a lot of work on these issues by ourselves and in conjunction with some of your officers. And I think one of the fundamental issues actually is analysing those areas which fall within some degree of local control, and those areas over which we have little or no control and where we are hostage to fortune. For example, if you look at the retail spread in Bournemouth, it's approximately 80% national chains and 20% local independents. That means that 80% of our retail offering is subject to national performance. So take, for instance, Karen Millen, which closed all its stores nationwide. The Karen Millen in Bournemouth was one of the top performing and most profitable stores in the country. But it closed and we lost the store. And to that extent, the trends in retail, the trends towards internet, there are issues there that are beyond our control and beyond your control. But I think what we can do, and where I'm very encouraged to see that the local authority is going to pick up and go forward with the town centre vision again, what I think we can do between us is identify areas that are within our control and are within our competence, and look to improve the areas that can be improved. And I think there has to be a fairly honest and fairly wide-ranging discussion. Bournemouth has a big high street retail area. There is an issue of oversupply. How that is addressed in terms of what tools are available to zone or to rework the centre of the town centre, what could be prioritised in other areas if the retail core area were reduced, are difficult issues. They're not straightforward issues, and I think the answer to the retail is that there is no simple solution, but there are things we can do. We do a visitor survey every year, and our visitor survey has indicated that of the visitors that came to Bournemouth and were surveyed over the Christmas Tree Wonderland period, 75% have indicated they won't come back to Bournemouth again. And the principal reason for that, which most of my retailers will tell you, is car parking. If you make car parking free, everyone will come. Actually, the reason why 75% of visitors said they wouldn't come back was aggressive begging. Not rough sleeping, but aggressive begging, and on the back of that, antisocial behaviour. And I'm afraid those are policing issues, and those are issues of police resourcing. I mean, I am again encouraged that there is an initiative being moved forwards by BCP to look at the possibility of pooling resources between the police, the BID and CSAS to investigate whether we can do something to increase the enforcement in the town centre. But ultimately, if the police, as they consistently do, tell us that they do not have the resources to patrol the town regularly, to stop antisocial behaviour, to stop aggressive begging, then that's something that we need to work. We need to work with the PCC. It's more a lobbying and what we can do to push and to promote change than something that is necessarily within our own direct control. So I'm not despondent about the future of Bournemouth. I think Bournemouth, I mean, I've long thought that Bournemouth and Brighton are the two bright spots on the south coast. For my sins, I tend to spend my working week trucking up and down the south coast, visiting county courts between Exeter and Maidstone. And Bournemouth and Brighton are the two places, or BCP. I live in Poole, so I must expand. I'm speaking as the BID, but BCP. Bournemouth, Poole, Christchurch and Brighton are the places I like to come. They are nice places. And I do think that there is a danger that we may get over-obsessed with navel gazing and throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have got a lot of very, very, very good things going on in Bournemouth. We've got a lot of we've got the natural features, we've got the beach, we've got the garden, we've got resilient businesses, we've got a resilient business community. I think what we need to do is to work together to promote the good and to change what we can change. And I think if we do that, then the high street can potentially be turned around, the other social problems can be dealt with, and I think Bournemouth has a great and a bright future. That's really my thoughts on behalf of the BID. Thank you. Paul, do you have anything to add?
You'd be disappointed if I didn't say something, Philip, I suppose. My working week is spent in Bournemouth Town Centre. Literally. I joke that I spend more on shoe leather than I do on tyres in terms of the job. And Martin's right in the sense that there are some significant issues that the levy payers communicate to us on a regular basis. And by definition, our role is to reflect those and to do the kind of things that we can. So when Martin says about the 75%, it's a slight tweak on that. The survey was 75% said they would not come back, or that they didn't stay as long as they wanted to, or they might think twice about coming. So it is, but that was 75% of that entire survey. And as we know, we get anywhere between 800 and 1,000 respondents on that survey. So it's a chunky survey. So for the levy payers within the town centre, rates, absolutely. Rent, absolutely. And that's been played out in the press incessantly over the past couple of weeks. The complex issue of street homelessness, begging, antisocial behaviour, drug, etc., is something that, from a personal point of view, and I know from a BID point of view, irrespective of anybody's political standpoint, because the BID is absolutely apolitical and all the way down the line, unless we, as everybody involved, sort this, and it is a national issue, and Bournemouth is not immune from any of that, then first and foremost, the people that we actually do disservice to are the people that actually need our help, as well as the retailers and the visitors. Everybody is vested in this. This is not something where you can go, it's your fault, or let's do that. But from our visitors survey and from our retailers, it's the hottest issue at the moment. So from whatever political standpoint anybody comes from, that's the kind of thing that we need to look at. First and foremost, for those people that are on the wrong end of all of that, and that need our help and support, as well as the retailers, as well as the visitors. Secondly, I echo Martin's comments in that having a town centre vision is hugely important. It cannot be just a vision of great, lofty, almost ephemeral, idea, if that's the right word, ideas. To link it back to the previous point, having a homelessness board with action groups underneath it is great, as long as the action groups act, that it's not just talking shops. But the same with the town centre vision. You can have a town centre vision that's absolutely wonderful, but unless it actually delivers real actions, and it pulls commercial agents, landlords, national retailers, independent retailers, politicians and officers and the bids around a table that says, how are we each going to move, because we'll all have to come to a point whereby we can deliver tangible actions, whether that's incubation zones, whether, for example, and we talked about this at the last presentation that we did, if you take Altrincham took an big empty space and turned it into an artisan food market. It pulls people in from all over the northwest. Now, if you look along the south coast, for example, I can't think of any other one that's like that. We potentially will have some interesting retail space in Bournemouth town centre. Council got to be brave. Landlords have got to be brave. Agents have got to be brave. We've got to be brave in order to create something that actually becomes a reason for people to come into town centres. Because town centres and city centres will not be the same as they were. And we fool ourselves if we think that's going to be the case. But also we shouldn't be hostages to fortune and go, well, they're going to be what they're going to be. We can't do anything. I genuinely believe we can. So having a town centre vision is great, and we'll be looking to BCP to drive that, but we need some action off the back of that. And the third thing that we talked about, and again, this is not a political issue. This is, please make it easy, and I don't mean bend over backwards just to accommodate whatever the requests are, on the planning side of things, to actually make people who want to drive and develop, make it at least easier for them and quicker for them to gain a conclusion, whether that's yes or no. Martin talked about the oversupply of retail. We're going to have to look at what happens in town centres in terms of the way our buildings are used. And some of that might be either unpalatable or it might take bravery. But to say that they can be used for exactly the same things they've already been used in and just say, well, we'll magically attract all these, won't happen. So from a practical point of view, inside, again, whoever's in charge, make it so that people who are looking to drive and regenerate and develop, especially in areas where there are existing buildings rather than building anywhere else, help them come to understanding that I says, yes, this is a goer, and yes, we can move it through much more quickly, because the current perception is it's a bit tough. And finally, you kind of got to talk about parking, because our levy payers do. It's not as simple as make parking free. Neither is it as simple as going completely discourage car parking from all towns and centres. There has to be an intelligent and honest conversation about that. I said it last year, and I'd say it again, and this is where we came up against a difference in policy. Short-term parking in Bournemouth is a problem. The phrase that comes out from all the bids across successful town centres is weekday convenience, weekend experience. And at the moment, we do kind of put people off from coming in, short, done and out. And I take the argument about sustainability, environmental, etc. So I say it's not a simple conversation. But in order to stimulate that kind of usage of weekday experience for town centres, we have to somehow make it easier for people to come in and go out. But I reflect Martin's at the end of this. Are there some serious issues in Bournemouth? Absolutely. Are there some serious issues that we need to address quickly? Yes. Is it anybody's individual fault? No. But is it something that behoves all of us, irrespective of where we are, to get round a table and have an intelligent debate and do some actions? Yes, because Martin's right. You know, there's some great stuff about Bournemouth. And whilst we're in danger of, we have to be honest and look at it and go, here are some of the challenges. By definition, it's not all bad.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to both of you. A really helpful summary of A, what you're doing, and B, some of the issues that we are collectively facing together. If I may start with just a few questions. I mean, in particular, is good to hear you talk about the need for actions and things that we have to do and we should do to identify problems and make sure that they're fixed. But of course, key to that is identifying what problems there are and why they are there. Now, we last heard from you 12 months ago here at the preceding council, and I think one of the pieces of work that you always do, which I found super interesting, was a lot of stats from both your visitor surveys and other kind of objective research you're doing. And I just wondered whether you could give us any indication of the direction of travel for some of those. So, I mean, for instance, we know we've seen recently that when we saw you last 12 months ago, there were 18 rough sleepers in the town centre. We're now finding that's, I think, over 60. So that has gone in the wrong direction. And I know that footfall on the one hand, on the other hand, we were seeing massive increases year on year with footfall in the town centre. I don't know what that's doing, whether that's continuing or whether that's changing. But I just wondered whether any commentary on what has changed in the last 12 months to see those differences.
So one of the things that we do on a daily basis is that we daily count those people who are, you would widely call rough sleeping. And one of the things I've learned in the past 2 years of doing this job is that phrase is just an entire spectrum of various people going from, and one of the things that we tend to use now rather than homelessness is street sleeping rather than just general homelessness, because you have people sofa surfing, people, etc. So I think it's important to distinguish that. So we look at the street sleeping and then the begging. What we notice is that the street sleeping and so forth has worsened. The begging, the situation of begging, again, wide area here, so let's not just go one thing, has also significantly worsened. And what happens is it gets worse during the day. So you find you have a number of people rough sleeping, street sleeping in the morning when we count. But then the actual nature of the begging, again, in terms of the numbers, increases, as you would kind of expect in terms of as the town warms up. But there's been between 3.5 and 4-fold worsening of the situation. Now, again, that's very easy to grab the kind of headline stuff. Context, it's worsened everywhere in the UK. There are very few centres that haven't, but it has worsened with us. So it's all wrapped into one thing. Footfall, interestingly, in 2019 was 8% down on 18, but it was still up on 17. So 18 was a real spike. So the trajectory is still kind of that way. But again, it's not just a headline figure and so forth. What's more important now is not how many, but who is coming in, how long they're staying, are they spending and are our businesses benefiting from that? So those are the kinds of figures that we have. And as I say, it's good to see the Homelessness Board and the action groups in, but that's the nature of, if you like, the encouragement for those action groups to be action groups is nowhere more demonstrated than the challenge that everybody faces in the town centre. By the way, I should say, that's only within the town centre bid area.
Sure.
So we don't look at Southbourne, Westbourne, Boscombe, Tuckton, or even external parts of the town centre area that do not fall within the town centre bids remit.
It's very specific. Thank you very much. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned how tough it was for developers to get planning consent, and as a member of the planning board, I understand how long some of these things can take. Is there any areas that you can highlight where it's particularly difficult for developers, or have you got any ideas about how the planning process can be loosened in a way that suits more rapid development?
I think I'm not sure it's loosened because, I have to say that I think having a clear planning policy is absolutely vital, and I don't think it should be let everybody run loose at all. That would be incredibly wrong. I think what maybe help is, one, for people to look at the current planning policy and go, does that actually fit the needs of a town centre in 2020 and going forward to 2025 and 2030? So is it still fit for purpose? I don't know the answer to that is the question. Secondly, there appears to have been a slowing down of approval or rejection or whether that's numbers, whether that's resource, again, I don't know, and it would be unfair to comment. Thirdly, a greater clarity that says if we ask you for this, or we want you to change something, that then when that's done, it can, there's 2 or 3 examples in the town centre where it's come back and gone, well, you know that stuff we asked you, well, we've kind of changed our mind now and we want something else. So there's a bit of where do we go? So if there's anything, I would go clarity, appropriateness and speed. That's all. It becomes for people better and greater qualified than me to say how that's done.
Martin.
If I could just add briefly on the back of that, I think looking at the extent to which further residential development needs to be encouraged in the town centre by continuing the process of Bournemouth Development Company, that's been successful, but also conversion of ex-retail. I know there is already a policy for the easy conversion of redundant office space into residential. Whether there needs to be something mirroring that for redundant retail space, but part of the way of generating footfall in a town centre without increasing a carbon footprint of travel is actually encouraging more people to live there. The more people we can get living in Bournemouth town centre, the more potential shoppers, the more potential restaurant users we have in Bournemouth town centre, and at no carbon footprint and with no issue with parking and transport and congestion and all of those things. So I would absolutely support anything which encourages increased residential use of the town centre. Thank you.
Very much. Got a few speakers, so we'll move through them. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually find myself speaking on behalf of a former ward colleague, Councillor Hedges, who's asked for a couple of points to be made. Many of you will know that Nigel, in one sense, is our very own Miss Marple, in that the world passes through that neck of the wood, through his business, and therefore he hears residents and visitors talking on a very regular basis. And has in the whole spectrum of the world, really. And his comments, particularly that he wanted raised today, he was very sorry not to be able to be here, was that there seems to have been a real ramping up in the responses he's getting from residents, and they're horrified by the street scene, and that people are having to, on occasion, very sadly, to slalom through the town centre. He finds it is reported to him that there is a great deal more aggression, and that the Winter Wonderland, very disappointingly, seemed to increase the amount of aggressive begging. It seemed incredibly targeted, rather than one might think of just an organic growth. He also puts in a request further for flush shop fronts. I know this has been discussed before, so that there are fewer places which are inviting, albeit cold and potentially wet, for people to set up encampments, and that that gentle nudge of persuasion into accessing other services that way would be a possibility too. And if I can just finish on my own comment from me, that I absolutely endorse what you're saying about town centre living. Is a very attractive way for many, particularly young people, but actually for families. The work that's going on, I'm so pleased to see St Stephen's coming on, where there will be some larger properties, the work done with Radian at Berry Court and so on. And we are building that population of town centre residents, and I think it's actually something very positive we can continue to take forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Wish to come back, Martin?
Very briefly, I take Councillor Hedges' point on aggressive begging, and as I said, it's cropped up as a major disincentive for people coming to Bournemouth. Unfortunately, it is a police issue. We lobby the police. Paul meets regularly with John Vasey and with Pete Browning, but we are told, as I suspect you are told when you speak to them, it's an issue of resources. But all I can suggest is it's a drum that we all keep banging, because the police seem to respond to what they would regard as reputational or organisational risk. And I think the answer is to convince the police that this is an area of organisation and reputational risk that they need to address, because they are in danger of losing the support of a substantial section of the community if they don't. Beyond that, I think there's very little that can be done about the aggressive and the unpleasant begging. And also, I'd add to that the antisocial behaviour. And walking, it's not a personal experience, walking through the town centre and seeing people relieving themselves in the flower beds by the square is not attractive. But that is, again, it's a police, it's an antisocial behaviour issue. And enforcement or control is the only answer, I'm afraid, as far as I can see.
Thank you very much. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. So, I'm very lucky to be on one of the homeless strategy action groups, and I was very pleased with my group, you know, a mixture of interest groups and charities. And we talked a lot in our first meeting about the difference between rough sleeping and homelessness, and how rough sleeping and begging and aggressive begging. And I think what was quite interesting to come out with that was that there's a lot of people who are obviously begging or causing ASB on the streets of Bournemouth and in the wider area who aren't actually homeless, and probably not the other way around. But I just wanted to see what I think you might have mentioned your statistics, but I didn't quite catch them there. Do you have separate statistics for begging and aggressive begging and for homelessness?
Yeah, we do. It's not broken down into things like aggressive begging, and we have no idea when you're talking to people what their individual stories are. So, you know, you have to caveat all of this stuff by going, hold on, we're talking about individuals here, and there may be some intelligence in terms of what their personal circumstances are, but we are not in that position to go, well, they aren't. We just don't do that. So in terms of begging, the incidents, let's say it's about 3.5 to 4 times. So for example, 182 up to 523 virtually in the year. That's incidents. That's not people. Let's be very clear about that, because we just log the incidents rather than the individuals. So, and then we separate that out in terms of rough sleeping, which is 134 up to about 400 incidents.
So an incident. Sorry.
Incident. So it could be the fact that it could be the fact that it is the same person, but the criteria we used in 18 and the criteria we used in 19 were the same.
I see.
So it's not as if we're going, right, you know, there's a whole lot of people, it's just the amount of incidents that go through. I just pick up on something else very quickly. I think this whole issue of, apology from the residential living issue. One of the other things that is significantly going to drive and help the experience of a town centre, it picks up something that Martin said earlier, is this issue of independent retailers. We have got to, as a group, whoever that group is, work on some very clear and practical strategies to attract and encourage and grow independent retailing in Bournemouth. Because it's one of the biggest draws to town and city centres across the UK. All the stats tell us that. And we have benefited a long time from nationals. But as Martin said, when you get hit with the national closures that are outside everybody's control a lot of the time, Bournemouth, because of the nature of its retail makeup, is going to get hit hard, and that's what's happened over the past kind of 12, 18 months. So we're currently working on a couple of major strategies to help drive the growth of independent retailing in Bournemouth, but we are going to need council help and support, landlord, agent support, etc. to do it. But I kind of don't want to give my cards away too early on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. I want to go through a couple of things. First of all, the street sleeping and begging, but also just briefly on parking, if I may. But if I can take them in 2 parts, that would be great. Thank you. And I've, as you know, represented the town centre for the last 9 years, and I've been very much involved in the town centre, well, since I moved to Bournemouth, when my dad had a shop there, right from when I was the age of 3. So you can't hark back to the days that there were, but we have seen, and your figures demonstrate it, a massive difference over the last 12 months in the number of people street sleeping, the number of people aggressive begging, the number of people passive begging. I understand that is a national issue. But elsewhere, and we've all been to different towns and cities, there's been nothing like the 3 to 4 times increase that since last spring to this spring there has been in Bournemouth Town Centre. And I think I have to slightly disagree with you, Martin, when saying, well, this is all a police responsibility. I don't believe it is. I think the council, certainly Bournemouth Council, took a responsible and a compassionate, but also a pretty strict and harsh line for the last few years, and that's what's been able to keep things contained. So I wonder whether, given that it's a partnership, I haven't seen over the last 12 months the police presence or the police action go down, which means it can only be the other partners who are involved who have changed things. It's not been the weather either. So what is it that has changed in the attitude of the council or other partners which has meant that we've suffered so much worse than other authorities in the last, since last spring?
I think partly, and I acknowledge the efforts that the authority makes with the CSAS officers. I know that you are CSAS officers light at the moment because the vetting is, and please don't think I'm just here to kick the police, but the vetting of your CSAS officers is tied up with the police, and if that were accelerated, it would help. Beyond that, I think that possibly, and picking up Councillor Hedges' point, I think possibly the landlords and the retailers of empty premises have a responsibility, and the shuttering up of, which you see in other towns, the shuttering up of doorways is something that would reduce things. Anything we can achieve across the board collectively to increase enforcement, increase assistance. And I think, and there is a point to be made, and it's the same point Paul made. There's a difference between people who are in need of assistance or social care, where there is a collective failure of those people as well, and people who are criminal or quasi-criminal who need to be dealt with in an enforcement way. And I think the trouble with this debate sometimes is it conflates the two. And I think you need to be very clear on what the problems are and where the solutions lie. And as a final point, based on my conversations with our levy payers and our feedback from the levy payers, I think I'm not sure that my levy payers would necessarily agree with you that there hasn't been a reduction in police presence over the last 12 months. But that's anecdotal, I'm afraid.
For me,
final point, we're going to have to wrap this particular item.
Yeah, and I understand that you're in a difficult place as well, particularly given where we're sitting. So I will just give a comment, if I may, on that one, which is that it seems to me as though over the last year there has not been a decrease in the amount of the police activity, certainly from the meetings that we have with the town centre police. It does seem as though the foot has come off the gas as far as the council side is concerned, but I won't ask you to put yourself in a worse position by coming back. I'd just like to ask you one very quick question then on parking. Would you see that if there was an increase or decrease in the amount of public parking available in the Bournemouth town centre, that it would be good or bad for your business?
I'm not sure the amount is necessarily the issue, because barring the mad days before Christmas, barring the Air Festival weekend, there always seems to be capacity within the car parks. I think the two issues are, as Paul said, first of all, short-term car park pricing. I accept that if you come to Bournemouth and park all day, it's very competitive compared with many other places. If you come in and park for an hour, it's expensive compared to even Poole. It's £1 for an hour in the Dolphin Centre, and it's £2.50 for the first 2 hours in Bournemouth. So I think pricing more than availability and capacity is the issue, and also it's becoming more difficult to get to Bournemouth, and I accept that is largely due to roadworks being undertaken by statutory undertakers and people that are very much beyond BCP's control much of the time. But we live in an area, and as part of a town centre vision strategy, I would really hope that would focus and include public transport and sort of much wider and bolder issues. For example, I'd love to know whether the traffic flow in the town centre would be improved by taking away the flyover in front of the BIC, because the entire seafront and the entire centre of the town and the front of the town would be improved by it. There are, I think we won't improve by doing the same. You want a different outcome, you need different actions, and I'd just like to think that at this point we've got an opportunity to do that and to be bold. And the final thing, on the back of my experience of Christmas Tree Wonderland through the bid and sharing the investors group, is actually when we all come together and when we work together and when we pool our resources and our efforts, we really can do good things. And I think that's where we need to focus for the future, how we can work together to make this town a better place for all of us.
Pick up on your parking thing, Mike. Kind of interesting from our perspective. If across BCP the council tax is being harmonised, does that mean the parking rates will be harmonised? And if that's the case, do the parking rates go down to the lowest common denominator or up to the highest? Because if there's one thing that's going to get people jumping up and down outside of council tax harmonisation, it's going to be parking rates. So I'll be very interested to see how that happens across the council in terms of and where it goes.
Thank you for that. A much wider debate at another time, I'm sure. We're going to take one final question on this section because I'm just very conscious we are overrunning, but any other members that do wish to speak, if we've got time after the other bids, then we can perhaps open it back. So Councillor Allen for the last question. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Talking to the people that deliver services, particularly targeting people that are rough sleeping in that particular group, I'm getting feedback that actually the service provision isn't bad, but what the significant issue is lack of engagement. And my impression from talking to them, and my personal impression, is that we're not getting the balance in the town centre between engagement and enforcement. And actually, if you don't get that balance right, you don't help people to make change and move on. And I was just wondering whether you feel that actually, I think I know the answer to your question, but whether you feel actually there is an imbalance in what we're doing around engagement and enforcement. And then my second, and this is just a comment, is I saw a very interesting programme about town centres recently on television, and about the fact that actually town centres have evolved and changed over the centuries and over time. And actually, what we do need to do is move away from those big chains and that very dull town centres where back you could be dropped into any town centre in England and actually all the same shops would be facing you, and it is dull and it's not very exciting. So I really want to explore the possibility of actually diversifying what we're doing, but that's just a comment. But my main question is, do you think whether we're getting the balance between enforcement and engagement right in not just in the town but in BCP? Thank you.
Taking your first point, something isn't working and something isn't quite right, because the problem does seem to be getting worse. I think both need to be improved. I think the more engagement we can have, the better, and if the enforcement is better, then it's going to produce results. I don't actually have the experience to comment on the technical breakdown of the balance between those two, but yes, something clearly needs to change.
Very quickly, the only thing I'd add to that, Hazel, a couple of things. One is that I hate the word enforcement, because it kind of depersonalises some of the individuals you're talking about. So I think we need to find a different word, because the whole point of this is to actually help people, where possible, through into a different set of circumstances than they find themselves in. If there then becomes a choice not to, for whatever reason, then that's, if you like, that route. But for me, the issue is every one of those people and so forth you deal with is an individual, so it can't just be a one-size-fits-all. So you need to have that. Secondly, the phrase you're talking about, the dropped anywhere, it's clone towns. And heaven forbid that we ever end up in a situation where Bournemouth becomes a clone town. Because at that point, then all the USPs that we do have, that Martin eruditely illustrated earlier, you know, we lose the importance of those. So it goes back to this bit about encouraging independent retailers and creativity within the town that gives it a USP for which reasons to people to come to. Whereas 20 years ago, it was you did your main shop. That's not likely to be the case now.
Could I just come back on that point? Just very
Very briefly.
The language I'm using of engagement enforcement is actually a language that is used quite readily when people that have got a lot of experience working with rough sleepers discuss it, and it's about not just support and encouragement, but it's also about not making the life on the street so comfortable that people don't want to make change, and it's a balance between getting the enforcement right and then getting the engagement right. So that's why I've used that language, because that's the language that is used quite readily in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Martin and to Paul for joining us. If we do have time at the end, then we perhaps take some more questions. While we change over to our next invited guest, which will be Ailsa Wilson from the Poole Town Centre bid, I believe the Chief Executive wants a comment.
Thank you, Trevor. Just a quick item just to pick up from Councillor Green's comment. I think the potential implication about whether there's been a change in council policy of enforcement. I'm reassured there has not been a change of council policy of enforcement within Bournemouth Town Centre. The only slight change is the consultation group, which is now a subgroup of the Homelessness Reduction Board. So just to reassure members, there hasn't been a change in policy that members haven't been informed of. And there is a report, however, coming to the March meeting, I think it is, of the Cabinet, about trying to get a more consistent approach to CSAS generally across the council. That might be helpful.
Thank you very much, Chief Executive. Councillor Brooke?
Just to try and correct one or two statements from Councillor Green, in terms of, he made reference to lots of other authorities, but gave us absolutely no evidence that they had got a significant reduction in number of homeless and begging, while ours had gone up. There was absolutely no evidence provided there. There is considerable evidence that the police effects in various areas is reduced, their presence is reduced, and that's certainly the case in some of the district centres, because they prioritise the really high order crimes and activities rather than some of the lesser ones. And thirdly, in terms of the actual homeless reductions, the January figures for BCP Council as a whole had reduced from the November total of 72 down to 53, in the proportions of down from 58 to 42 in Bournemouth. Christchurch stayed the same at 3, and Poole down from 11 to 8. So there is a significant reduction of in the region of 26% on the homeless sleepers over that time period. Equally, those housed in December was significantly up on previous months' figures, and I'm also told that there was a significant reduction in supported housing evictions over the previous 3 months. So there is significant work obviously going on which is reducing those figures. And while I accept the issues that have been raised and presented to us very, very clearly, I think some of the comments that have come from our members has not necessarily been absolutely accurate, and these are the most up-to-date figures. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Moving on, if we will, thank you very much to Ailsa and special celebrity guest Ian Girling as well. I'll invite you to give a presentation to us. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to introduce Ian. He's actually here as a member of our pool bid board, so he's supporting me in that capacity as opposed to DCCI. So, my name is Elsa Wilson. I've worked for Pool Bid for approximately 6 months. Coming on to Pool Bid, it's really evident that the High Street is a reflection of the health of the wider community of Poole. I think the issues that we are seeing manifest themselves on the High Street are as a result of what's going on in Poole in general. I think as a community it's suffered from systemic and prolonged historic underinvestment really in Poole. To use the bricks and mortar of the High Street is a prime example. It looks the way it does, tired, tatty, unloved, because it hasn't had any substantial investment since 1983. So if there are any kind of, issues about electricity, dodgy pavements, that kind of thing, we have to go back to the root cause, which is underinvestment. But to go on to some of the biggest and most significant issues that we have in the High Street, I think unrealistic rents is probably a big factor. I think there is a core of a lot of there are businesses on the High Street which are offshore banks, pension funds, etc., private investors who can afford to sit on property and are not particularly incentivised to actually re-let them, and therefore they are quite happy for them to sit empty and fall into dereliction, which actually we have no power over. It's not something that I can influence. And actually, you can see it up and down the High Street. That's a common occurring story, which I think is hugely influential on the look and feel of the High Street. It's not something that we can change overnight, and actually it's going to need a collaborative and multi-agency working and a policy about what we do with these properties, because if somebody is quite happily sitting on a property for 10, 15, 20 years, what do we do with that? Because it's having a direct impact on the quality of the High Street. I reiterate and I second what Paul and Martin have just said about things like antisocial behaviour. We have quite big issues with that, the rough sleeping, the begging. But I think nobody seems to have addressed the point that actually we have had nationally years and years of austerity, which if anybody were to look at the root cause of why there is an increase in antisocial behaviour, an increase in rough sleeping, in antisocial drinking, it does relate to the support services that are being underfunded in a time where actually they are acutely needed. So to look to business and businesses and a body like Pool Bid or any other bid, we are directly seeing the impact of that, and therefore the business up and down the High Street, they see the impact of that. So we shouldn't see it I think there's a danger of being quite inward looking. Actually, we're kind of only looking at BCP, but actually it's the state of the nation. And I think we see it throughout the country. We're not unique at all. If you go to any high street up and down the country, there is the same situation, I think, with antisocial drinking, begging, homelessness. So I think as a society we have an issue and also a responsibility to get structures in place to actually help these people and to get them into a position where they are functioning human beings again. To move on from that, the bus station, I think, in Poole is one of the key barriers to the negative perception of Poole. It's a reoccurring theme. It's been a reoccurring theme for decades. And actually, we are at the point where, week on week, the risk of a serious incident of antisocial behaviour could lead to a fatality or serious kind of, injuries. We've had some over the Christmas period. At the bid, we are pushing very hard and working with BCP, with the police to try and ease that situation. But I personally am not the one that can go and I can't fix this. I can only lobby and I can only put pressure on to actually make sure that the people who can fix this do take that responsibility seriously. I think it's kind of, it's seen as a bit of an axe to grind, but actually when it comes down to it, if you look at the responses from our regular business surveys, it's one of the things that's quoted as a massive barrier time and time again. We now have a situation where yellow buses are pulling out of the bus station and are rerouting via the train station. So without doubt, that's economic impact. We have a language school called the Albion Language School who brings something like 2.3 million into Poole over the summer. They are talking about relocating their business and either shifting it to Ireland or to Germany. So potentially that's a massive loss of revenue for the centre of town, but also for families within Poole. So there are economic impacts on lack of activity and lack of kind of raising these things as priorities. So we need it to be taken seriously. I know it's a bête noire for Poole, the bus station, and we have tried our best to try and get people to take us seriously, but to no avail at the moment. I know we are having conversations with people, but we just need somebody to actually go and get it done. So I think we, like Paul, are suffering from a lack of vision, lack of plan. I know we did have one on the table and it has gone back to the drawing board, but what I would like to say is that really, really needs to be prioritised, because I think to reflect the feelings of the community, there was a lot of hope that was invested in things like the cinema complex development in Poole, and also for the North regeneration, and also for the Quayside regenerations. The fact that that's slowed to the point where it has to be go back to the brief, I think has had a massive impact. I think it's kind of really knocked the positivity that we need to be generating on Poole High Street. And I think people are disappointed. They are, where do you go if BCP is kind of stalling these things? And I know we have the Future High Street Fund and I know we have the HAS Fund, but actually we need a plan. We need a plan for Poole.
Thank you very much. We've obviously got Ian here as well, who has many hats, as well as being a board member of the Poole Bid, is the Chairman, President, CEO, Chief Exec. I knew I'd get there eventually, of the Dorset Chamber as well. So any comments you wish to add?
First of all, if I can just make a couple of comments as a Poole Bid member. I think clearly the homelessness issue has been discussed a great deal today. For me, and that's clearly a huge problem in Bournemouth, and it's an increasing problem in Poole. But for me, as a Poole Bid member and a Poole resident, what's really concerning is just the amount of empty units that are in High Street, and that's a very difficult issue for the bid to address. And of course, no shop wants to be sat next to an existing number of shops, and that broken window syndrome where one business starts closing, then another, and that's very difficult to address. We do need to see that vision back for Poole again. Elsa's absolutely right. Poole needs that investment. I think Poole's had underinvestment for many years, and I think probably has felt a little bit like the poor relation to Bournemouth, to be perfectly honest. That investment is needed, and Elsa's right. We need to start with that bus station, because it's a huge problem, and we're just gathering so much negative press as a town all the time on that issue. If I can just comment from a Chamber perspective, I mean, with the Chamber of Commerce for Dorset, we have a membership of around 700 businesses across Dorset. We're really concerned about the state of the high streets in terms of the economic growth and prosperity of the whole area. I know we're talking BCP today. Dorset's got its real challenges as well, and I think there's a huge cost for us in terms of businesses, attractiveness as a business location, our ability to attract businesses to come into the area, and not least of all tourism. Paul mentioned one of the stats around the issue of homelessness preventing people from coming back to the area, 75% of people, so they wouldn't come back because of homelessness. I speak to lots of people that come and visit the area and they have a really negative, a negative experience while they're here, and they're shocked. I think some of the we're facing a multitude of issues. I mean, we've just put a press release out on this, calling for a much bolder thinking and a different kind of thinking. I think the high street is changing at the moment. It's changing hugely. We can't stop that, and none of these organisations, or should they even, look at adapting to trying to change online retail. That is changing, and that's the free market at work. But high streets themselves are changing. We've heard views that high streets should be a mix of residential, a mix of businesses, experiential type shopping as well. And for us, we think it's a planning issue in terms of moving those high streets forward. I personally feel that high streets are they're right down there at the moment. And actually, they're in their death throes as they stand, and we need to support those to bring them back. Just a couple of the issues that are coming through that I speak to businesses about. Piles of clothing in doorways constantly. I was in Bournemouth myself this morning and saw that, and looked pretty awful. And there was food there, and the seagulls have got in there as well, and it just looked awful. There's a constant smell of weed in town, just constantly. I've also seen people urinating in the gardens, and it's just, it's awful. Businesses are feeling unsafe. Businesses are concerned about their staff. It's quite well known that Team Jobs has just pulled out of Bournemouth. I opened that office with him 3 years ago, and Jason Galt, the MD, was so pleased to be there. But actually now they've pulled out, and one of the reasons that they pulled out of that area is because of concerns around their staff and just the general feeling of the town. So for me, I think really we need quite brave, logical, quite radical thinking to really try and address some of these issues. And perhaps we know there's a host of issues, but we need to prioritise.
Thank you very much to both of you. I'll start, if I may, just Elsa, you talked a lot about the national picture and a lot of the national issues that are affecting high streets in general. Obviously, you're here to represent Poole Town Centre in particular and have a forum here about any ideas or particularly pressing issues or things that you'd wish to see happen sooner rather than later, particularly anything that we can affect. So obviously there's a national picture, but locally, what would you like to see happen here to move this situation forward?
I think it's better policing. I have quite a close working relationship with our neighbourhood policing team, and I know for a fact that they have been really badly hit by drop in numbers. So I think for the centre of Poole, so I'm talking about sort of Turlin Moor, Camford, Heath, kind of into Oakdale, there were 20 police officers, and that also included a team of PCSOs. We are now down to 8 police officers for a much larger area. So we do have policing issues. They are doing as much as they can with the resources that they can, but sadly, it is what it is. And through shrinkage, retirement, redeployment, it's just, we see police officers move onto the high street and then move off on a regular basis. I work very tightly and very closely with the town centre team in Poole with regards to some of the sort of the daily issues. But I think the lack of a bigger strategy is massive, I think, and if we need to give Poole hope, and actually I don't see where that's coming from. I know hope is seen as something that we should be kind of not, when people talk about hope, it's actually seeing hope for the future. We need to be building forever homes for families to put down roots and invest in Poole. It's a very transient population at the moment. And actually, I think that's reflected in what's happening on the streets. But with regards to kind of what you can do, there's loads of things that I could really do with help with, because we have Christmas lights, for instance. We didn't have the ability to do what we wanted because we didn't actually have safe hardware to plug stuff into, because they haven't touched the electrical system in years, and it's now out of date. It's illegal. We can't use half of the stuff. So it's really basic stuff. It's really basic stuff. The high street surface is spent. It causes people tripped ankles, accidents. I myself have picked old ladies up off the street as a result of tripping over this stuff. It's dated. It doesn't look nice. If there were a magic wand solution available, it would look a damn sight nicer than it does. But it just looks like it's been stuck in the 80s. And let's face it, that wasn't a good look for anyone.
Super. Thank you very much. Councillor Maidment.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to agree completely with what you were saying earlier about the austerity and the impact of some of the national issues, because I think that that's had a significant issue on all our high streets. But also the points made previously around the Bournemouth bit about what is and isn't in our control, because the cinema development, we haven't been holding that up. That's actually not in our control at all. And equally, we have announced a plan for Poole, and interestingly, a working group that I'm sitting on convenes next week. So it is something that has been announced and is being invested in. So yeah, I just wanted to make those points and focus on what is and isn't on our control, because there's a national picture that's having a significant impact in terms of policing, austerity and so on. But locally there is action going on, and there has been the plan for Poole announced, and active work is currently going on around it.
Thank you. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you. It's a couple of things. There's something which you said, first of all, thanks Elsa for doing that. Something you said before, which you said we're not unique, and it's kind of what Councillor Maidment was just saying there as well, about how there's town centres across the country which are all suffering from similar lack of investment over years and things like this. I kind of feel like we're going round in circles when it comes to like the rough sleeping and the aggressive begging and what we can and can't do about this. We put on events, and like Councillor Mrs Green said before, like the Christmas Tree Wonderland in Bournemouth, and that saw an increase of aggressive begging happen with that, because we're advertising those sort of events and people see it as easy picking, essentially, to come and take advantage of the amount of people we're trying to bring into the town centres. Again, we've got Light Up Pool coming up later this month, which I'll hope will bring more people into Pool. And going back to what you were saying as well about the police, on last Friday, I went into the CCTV control room in Bournemouth, and I was quite fascinated, actually. I didn't realise how covered the town centre was, and I was told that Pool's similar, and that's all coming under one control centre soon as well. But what the operators were saying to me is they're making these reports to the police when they see things going on, antisocial behaviour and that, and they're not getting the response because the police have not got the funds and not got the availability, because they're prioritising more serious crimes as well. And it's this amalgamation of what's effectively small petty crimes which isn't being dealt with, which is creating bigger problems. And where you say we're not unique, but it'd be nice to be unique and bring these, take control of these issues and bring in more local businesses as well and get that balance right in the high street, like Paul was saying earlier about the Altrincham Food Market, or where I'm originally from in Liverpool, there's a street called Bold Street, which is all just independent shops, which really draw people in, not just from the local area, but from the wider area as well. And on that side, I'm really supportive of what you're saying, and we should be helping and working together as much as we can be to support this and make a draw to our town centres, whilst also dealing with the issues that come with bringing more people in as well.
So to come back to you about that, what independent in their right mind would want to come onto the high street with it being in the state that it is? You're right. So petty crime, which is defined as a retail theft under about £250, it just doesn't get responded to by the police, and it's not because they don't want to, it's not because they don't care, it's just they have not got the resources to respond to it. We had one business on the high street who lost, not this Christmas past, but the one before, £19,000 worth of goods. So that's a significant amount of money. So what business in their right mind, so especially independent, because the margins are going to be so much smaller, the risks are so much more high, I just don't see, until we can actually improve the perception of Poole High Street and actually get people talking about the good things rather than the negative things, and this goes back to tackling ASB, tackling the issues with the bus station. Until we get those issues sorted, I, with all honesty, could not encourage any business to come and open up on Poole High Street, because I think it wouldn't be fair. I think we need to set businesses up for success, not failure. So actually, as a joint responsibility, you know, I am here to give you the intelligence to actually put you in the picture, because actually stood in the bus station for an hour last Friday is illuminating. And I would encourage all of you, if you want to know what's really going on, get yourselves out on the streets, because actually sat here it's really, really abstract. But when you see the sharps, so the detritus of drug taking, when you see that kicking around the streets, when you see it in the bus station where we are expecting our children to catch our buses from, where we're expecting nursery school kids to walk through on the way to the library. You know, it's really easy to talk about these things and kind of listen to it, sat around a table like this or on an email, but actually when you see it for yourself on the streets, I think it is an entirely different experience. And actually, I would urge you, if you really want to know what's going on, go outside. And
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of more speakers then. Yeah, please, Ian.
Just a general point, new question about policing. I sit on a couple of business groups with the police in terms of helping them engage with businesses, and there's a real challenge in terms of, I would say, a huge amount of business crime isn't even reported now because the business owners actually don't feel they'll get any sort of response. So that's leading. We're not actually seeing a true picture in terms of business crime coming through, because it's just not being reported.
Thank you very much. If I could just, before we move on to the other two speakers, just pick up on one point, Ailsa, because you are the manager of the town centre bid in Poole, and you just said that you wouldn't encourage anybody to open a shop in Poole High Street. Is it that bad?
It's a controversial thing to say, but to be honest, I could honestly say at the moment that I think the barriers to success that businesses, especially independent businesses, will face are huge. So we have a collective responsibility to do something about that. And actually, the future of the high street is going to be in mixed use. It's going to be retail. It's going to be experiential. But actually, from an experiential perspective, it's really unpleasant right now. And we have to do something about this.
Appreciate your candour. I've got two more speakers, Councillor Fia and then Councillor Iyengar.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to bring things a little back onto the bus station, if I may, because you actually said earlier no one seems to be taking you seriously when you raise that. Now, from how you've demonstrated your passion for Poole in this, I'm quite perplexed. One, why people aren't taking you seriously. Why do you think they're not taking you seriously? And it's not just the board you're talking to us today. There are members in this room that are on the cabinet that have a bit of punch to actually get things rolling on this issue. Because if you've, like just stated, you can put a hand on your heart offering new businesses to open up in Poole. What are the main things on that bus situation? Because if there's going to be a fatality like you suggested there could be, what's the get up and go this council needs to help you in that and work as a team, like the Bournemouth bid was saying earlier, because it is a team effort at the end of the day. So what can these people in this room do to help you on that?
So we have established that closing the cut-throughs in the bus station is a good idea. I've got backing from council, but also the police. If you can just find me a man with a hammer and some MDF, that would be lovely, because right now, actually, what we're lacking is knowing what job list this has to go on. There is backing. There's been backing from Bill Cotton. There's also been backing from Safer Communities. But actually, we literally just need to get this onto somebody's job list and done, and then we can start talking about actually how we revitalise that bus station to make it a cleaner, more pleasant place. But we have to really look at the structural issues first, get that sorted, and then we can start making it a much more attractive place for people to travel in and out of.
Thank you very much. We're massively running over on time, but we'll keep playing through. Councillor Brooke, then Councillor Farquhar, and then Councillor Anger.
Thank you. Right, fine. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for picking up the point earlier about whether the town should attract, and we should be pushing and promoting the town rather than running it down. One or 2 points. The bus station is owned by at least 3 organisations, as you are aware, and I think the council only owns the canopy. So there's a lot of, you need to go to the right people, bus company or legal in general, to actually sort out the building work that you want doing, if I understand correctly. I have to say that there was a time when I seldom went into Poole Town Centre, but I've been in much more frequently over the last few months, and I'm actually pleased to see that from previous situations, and this is just an impression, and it would be interesting to know the figures, but the footfall in Poole does seem to have increased of late, especially in the central area. So I was just wondering what information you have in the way of footfall within the Falcon Square, within the Dolphin Centre itself. I accept that the Kingland Crescent does have a very, very bad outlook because virtually every shop is closed. I don't think that is necessarily the fault of some of the traders there or the high street situation, more to do with who owned them and the fact that that particular project has stalled because Legal and General do not appear to be taking it forward, but they've emptied all the shops. So these are issues which actually we've got to address, but it's how do you get a company like Legal and General to fulfil the scheme and the promise that they had created in the first place. So we need to look, I think, at some of the ways that can be done and re-engaging with them. But I know that there are other schemes and things in the pipeline. The pool plan is being promoted as well. I gather that the council is currently seeking additional funding from a Heritage Action Zone. So there is work, again, there is work going on, and you need to tap into the work that's going on rather than just keep saying it's a horrible place, we're not going to get anyone there. We have attracted a lot of companies in. Yes, they are part of the clone scene, if you like, but also interesting. Dykeman's, for instance, in the shoes in the town centre is a recent investment. And so are several of the others. So there are a lot of things going on. We need to be promoting those. BID needs to be promoting those. But yes, we do need to respond to some of those key issues. And yes, we do need to develop a more radical strategy. But I'm sure that is in the pipeline through the portfolio holders already.
Thank you very much. In an effort to reclaim back some time, I'll take the next 2 speakers and then just ask if you could anything you want to respond to from them. So, Councillor Farquhar, then Councillor Ayenga.
Thank you very much, Chair. I must say that I found this the most fascinating of all the ONSs. I'd probably make a recommendation because what I found out today is that we only invite the bid teams in once every 12 months. And I would suggest perhaps that the ONS should consider as a forum to actually liaise far better with our businesses and the difficulties that they're facing on behalf of the whole towns, the whole conurbation, as opposed to once every 12 months or so. I've no easy fixes, but I think what I hear very clearly here is the requirement for action rather than further talking shops and talking over the same issues, etc. It's certainly some of the things which are being talked about today, other councils, such as Bracknell, for empty properties, etc., bulldozed their town centre and rebuilt it. I used to live in Camberley, so I can speak to the actual being on that town centre and how it was a no-go area. So I like the fact that we've got representatives of the bid team coming here talking about radical ideas. And I think the council should be open to listen to them. So I'd make a recommendation to the chair that we allow that facility for our businesses to do so. The only thing which I'd just add just quickly is that it seems from the discussions is that we are a victim of our own success with the events that we have on. Christmas Wonderland, the light up a pool and so on and so forth. Is we've also got a facility in our licensing committee to ensure public safety and prevent crime and disorder. There might be an opportunity in licensing these events whereby we can put more emphasis on additional staffing, security, barrier controls, etc., which may actually address, perhaps in combination with our CSAS teams, so that we can actually get to recognise the same offenders, as it were, over and over again. Because it's horrible that we have, let's say, organised crime from outside coming in, making a blip on our figures, targeting our events, which are actually there for not only our residents but visitors to our town to enjoy our town. So there's a blight. But that would be my recommendation, to consider that, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to take that on board and completely agree. Councillor Iyengar.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just hop around a few points, but I'll do it quickly. Thank you. Elsa, thank you. I think quite right. Your exhortation to us is to not be in council offices and to see things as they are. I'm glad to say, but barely a day goes by I'm not in Poole High Street. Pretty well every day I'm there, whether it's the whole length of it or part of it from the quay right up to the lighthouse. And just literally, for good or for ill, I've seen all the changes that have gone through in the High Street. I would echo Councillor Brooks' comment. If I encourage us not to engage in negative self-talk, it's not about being in denial about the seriousness of what's going on. But I think those of us in position, all of us, many in this room, I think have got to be careful that things don't perpetuate further. And I do hope that things said in this meeting today will be reported outside the meeting with due care before we precipitate things even worse. Okay, so I think my meaning is clear there, and I hope it'll be understood. The one about policing, I sat on the Dorset Police Crime Panel. Dorset Police's challenges are well known, and there's a national funding formula which disadvantages Dorset and several other rural, rather metropolitan police forces. To be blunt, for the sake of time, don't lose your power of challenge with Dorset Police. A rightful challenge, and I've made it to the Chief Constable politely but firmly, and to the Police and Crime Commissioner politely but firmly, about with the resources they have, how much has been made available to frontline policing versus resources used elsewhere. So in the general round, I agree with what you're saying, and I agree with what Pete Browning, I know Pete Browning, what he's been saying about resources time. They are correct. At a higher level, strategic level, how much of the force has been made available to frontline policing, a legitimate challenge remains on Dorset Police there, and I will support you and others in keeping that challenge alive. Okay? The one about the vision, quite rightly you said, the vision, okay, and Councillor Maidment said, we've got a meeting next week on it. I'm on that group as well. Delighted to be on that group to bring something back. I will offer an opinion on this. The vision that was already there for Town Centre North, God knows, a vision for Town Centre North will never have complete unanimous agreement for it. And whatever we start doing next week, whatever we generate will not have complete agreement around it either. I'm dismayed that we seem to be sort of stop, start with something in Poole. I'm totally behind you, which is something which just gets momentum and gets us going in roughly the right kind of direction will be more than good enough. Okay, and now speed, more than anything else, must be priorities 1 to 9 now in this, rather than aiming for sort of let's stop and let's recurate it yet again. Because I've lived in Poole 20 years, I'm as despairing as anybody about no speed with all of these things. I think I'll hold it there with one final point. I think quite wrongly, big retailers seem to have had a bad press at today's meeting, and I'd like to balance that up a little bit. Big retailers were at the mercy of national decisions taken elsewhere, and that point is noted. Big retailers sometimes are the mainstay of employment, training, development and promotion, and I think somebody, you may have been Elsa, others have said, we need those people to sort of hold the economy a little bit. And B, I know you're passionate about this, is which employers are training and developing people, and particularly the higher level skills as well. We need those people, so we need the right mix of big retailers, big traders, and also a healthy growth of independence as well. So let's just redress that balance a little bit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Iyengar. Elsa and Ian, thank you very much for attending. I do have the Cabinet Member wants to speak. If I could ask at the end, Mark, if that's all right, because at that point, as a Cabinet Member, you can perhaps summarise a few of the issues, and I'm quite happy to give you that platform, no problem at all. So thank you very much. The final bid representatives we have is from the Bournemouth Coastal bid, and thank you very much for coming. And if you're happy to introduce yourself and then more of the same. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Clark. I'm the chair of the Coastal Bid. I'm also on the committee of Baha. We have a lot of hoteliers, obviously, so I'm part of that. And also on the Bournemouth and Poole Tourism Management Board. So how much time do you have? And I'll try and bring you back.
Minus 1 hour.
Right, okay.
But it's only fair that no bid is better or worse than the others, and the Bournemouth Coastal bid has a critical role to play. So again, as we've heard from the others, a brief summary of things that you're up to, things that you're concerned about, and we'll go from there.
Okay,
Thank you.
So I think all of you today, I've heard from my colleagues, both from Town Centre bid and the Pool bid, that between the three of us, the three bids are here to support the towns and to make a difference, to regenerate, to come up with events and projects and what have you. So I think what's important for you around the tables is that we all need your support as councillors to tell your relevant people what we can do for you and listen to what the things, so we can listen and do things for you as well. In my experience, I've had many occasions in the past 8 years I've been involved in the coastal bid where a lot of councillors don't even realise that events or initiatives have actually been funded by the bids in their own particular wards, and I reach out to you in respect of we really want to engage with you and to tell you what's going on, because we can really support you and work together very, very well. If we talk about the coastal bid, we are very different in that we are not town-centric. We are very much smaller areas, so I would describe it as villages, as well as the hoteliers, which is a big part of our bid levy. Over 20% of our bid levy is hotel-related. So if we talk about hotels in particular, and I work around the other areas, factually, occupancy over the last 3 years has remained flat as a town for hotels. So whilst we have these challenges, as a group we can work together and improve them. Our guests into Bournemouth factually have not stopped coming to us over the year, which is encouraging for us to hear, because if it was really, really, really that bad, then they would not return. That's peaks and troughs, so that's just a general strategic headline. However, when customers do stay in hotels, and I do actually run 2 hotels and have done so for the last 11 years, the Castle and the Eastcliff, guests absolutely love Bournemouth every day of the week, but there's always that hidden frustration from them, in particular around the homeless and the fact that they're being asked for money. Generally they go for walks late afternoon, early evening, which is generally the worst time of the evening for mature or latterly aged guests, of which mine are, to go down and be approached and to be intimidated to the point where they would not go down in the evening. They wouldn't do it when they come next time. They'll manage their time and do it in the afternoon, in the mornings and what have you, which is a great concern, not only for my hotel guests, but as well as other hotel guests within the town. We also have an issue with we talk about policing in respect of people coming to the hotels if we have an issue. I can think of more than one example where there have been drugs on site in a hotel bedroom that have been reported proactively to the police that has not been attended to the point where these people who are drug dealers have not been arrested when we've actually given it to them on a plate to react to. So that's sort of the support element. Policing, I'm not going to dwell on that. And I think generally, as I've said before, we are very different in that we don't have the Poole Town Centre as a big area there where people may meet together and choose what they need to do, similar to the Town Centre bid, both doing a very good job. But I think for us it's about partnerships, working together. As a Town Centre bid I've already demonstrated, we have similar partnerships where we have CSAS, an example. If we want to celebrate things, which we still need to celebrate today and not all leave the room and be very negative, what we're going to do to change this whole area. CSAS many years ago when the Coastal Bid was formed, decided to have CSAS in Boscombe. There is very little or very major issues in Boscombe as far as our levy pay is concerned, because we have proactively worked the councils through CSAS and continue to do so to reduce the crime, reduce the disorder in that area, as well as doing the proactive marketing things, as well as giving them a very good Christmas, as well as events at the right times of the year, and also supporting the marketing initiatives for them in that area. Similarly with Southbourne, Southbourne's very, very fortunate over years, and it's been on the TV a lot. You've had all your property programmes that have been using Southbourne properties. You've got the restaurants, and there's a lot of restaurants opening down there. It's becoming a very cosmopolitan sort of area to live, which is great. You have Boston, like I mentioned. You have the West Cliff and the East Cliff, where we refer to support again. It's around the planning conditions and the change of use. We spoke about this over 5 years ago, and the council and yourselves have listened to that, and there are now opportunities where we are allowing hotels that are not fit for purpose to not be hotels in future. And there's also the opportunity where you are allowing hotels to come into the town, granting plan permission, where we have other brands come into the town. So we have Holiday Inn, which is Ramada Encore, a change of brand, but it's still really good. You've got the Hilton that wasn't here 8-9 years ago. You've got the brand new Malmaison, which will be here hopefully probably middle of next year. You've got another Premier Inn on the Wessex hotel site. In my particular hotels, we're going through an exciting change, which I can't elaborate on at the moment. But the hotels are actually, they are prospering and they're doing well. Occupancy isn't back. We all have our own challenges with regards to business rates and rents and what have you, but we have to get on, I think, and just get on with it and maybe put our rates up and do things differently. Parking, I'm not going to go on about parking, but it is an issue, similar to what my colleagues have said earlier. Shops, again, I know the town centre bid have done a lot of work around shop fronts, putting screens on, as I have done on Marks and Spencer's, just up the road. We've done similar things in Southbourne and Westbourne to make them look nicer. Smaller areas probably makes a bigger impact because it's not as big a property that we need to look at. The other thing was lighting as well. For us, Christmas Tree Wonderland is a massive thing, as it is with the town centre bid. We work very closely and very pleased to celebrate that along with the council, who support us with that. But within the areas, we have challenges around infrastructure with lighting. In particular, we want to put lighting up, so we are willing and are paying for lighting to go up. However, the actual lights and the structure or power of those lights, it needs to be sorted out. So we actually have, roughly speaking, 10 months to sort that out, which can easily provide a better experience for our relevant areas, because we can get that work together, and that's council infrastructure. It's a very easy fix. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much,
Any
Paul.
questions?
No, it's very, and it's quite nice that we have a different flavour of bids across the area, don't we? So you cover lots of different areas and the hotels. So it's really interesting to see it from that side as well. Councillor Allen.
Without regressing the conversation back again, certainly I do think that the aggressive begging that we're seeing in the town centre does have quite a negative impact on our visitors, and it's interesting that you're getting that feedback, and I certainly get that feedback from my residents. And there was just a couple of points that other councillors brought up that I wanted to reiterate. So I'd like to mention what Councillor Earl mentioned, that actually we do need to make sure that when we're having a conversation about this, is the difference between people that are rough sleeping and in need of support, and those that are actually are housed but are also still begging in the town. And the fact that those numbers go up significantly when we've got events does suggest that actually a lot of those people are not necessarily rough sleeping. And I think that's important that we look at aggressive begging and antisocial behaviour and not necessarily link it directly with people that are in need. And then the other point that I'd like to pick up on is what Mohan mentioned, and I do think that actually there may well be an issue with lack of resource with policing, but I also think it's also about the strategic aims of the police force and whether or not we need to encourage them to put antisocial behaviour higher up on their agenda and actually to it become one of their strategic aims. But I'm pleased to hear that actually it sounds like the hoteliers are doing maybe a bit better than other areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from other councillors? Councillor Farquhar.
I'll take you up on your offer, Chair, of there's no stupid question, as it were. Just for expansion, you mentioned CSAS officers there. How is the funding for that, and is the coastal bids, are the bids involved in funding those individuals, and do they have any sort of claim upon how those individuals are deployed? Now, I do understand from sitting on the police and crime panel is that they are under the control and the auspices of the police. They are vetted by the police. They are trained as the police, and that's, the clues in the name CSAS. But is there an opportunity here for funding more CSAS officers by actually tapping into the levy, which could then directly address some of the issues that the businesses and the hoteliers are actually having? And I'm just raising it as something which seems to be a recurring theme that's coming through, is that if we're not getting the police resourcing, why don't we look at resourcing where we can, but in cooperation with the police, which crosses over those borders, whereby what you could statutory can do as regards aggressive begging.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I'm sure, Paul, you'll have some views on that.
Yes, it's very well. It's a double-edged sword, really, because yes, the bids does work with the council. We work in partnership and fund that jointly. So I think from a coastal bid point of view, and I'm sure Paul and from the town maybe have the same point, is who should actually pay for it. So we're very happy to support and work in partnership, as we do with many people within the town, to provide benefit to our levy payers. In answer to your particular question, we have already had conversations with the police, in particular around creating, so the CSAS in Boscombe is what you would call a zone. So that CSAS officer is not allowed to leave that zone. They focus on that particular zone. That's the unique thing about a CSAS as opposed to a police officer. We've actually looked at a similar thing for our hoteliers, whereby on the East Cliff in particular, we would fund our own CSAS officer, but in partnership with the police, where they would support it in kind or with their experience, as well as CCTV and that sort of thing. So we've already sort of discussing that and looking to do that in future.
Thank you very much, Paul. Councillor Lawton.
Can I just say that as a person who introduced CSAS officers in Boscombe under my authority when I was portfolio holder, and in Bournemouth Town Centre, you're quite correct. They're limited to specific areas in Boscombe and in the town centre. And in general terms, they are employed by the council. The council funds them and the council operates them. Under strict controls, they do have certain powers which is levied to them by the Chief Constable. They don't have powers of arrest, but they do have powers of asking a person for their address. And I'm a great supporter of CSAS officers. I would be because I introduced them, but I think they're a very good thing for the town centre, and they will be good once we manage to get more into the town centre.
Thank you. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Really just to make a brief comment as a ward councillor for Westbourne, which is covered by the coastal bid. I'm so glad that we've managed to have you here, Paul, along with the two town centre ones, because the coastal bid is something a bit different in representing our villages, where a lot of our residents from all around the conurbation choose to visit, choose to shop. Many of them clearly live there. They're not immune to the issues which we see in the town centre. Clearly, we see them very clearly through the town centre. But in areas such as Westbourne, where we have a lot of retired people, we do need to be aware that those issues clearly our focus is on the individuals who are in difficulties, but actually the impact that has on our settled population who can be put off, unfortunately, from using facilities which are on their doorstep and which we need them to be to feel safe and to be using all those benefits. We know the damage of loneliness, which is caused by people feeling they can't get out of their homes. So just in thanking Mr Clark actually for coming along and speaking about the work of the coastal bid, just say don't forget us in the other shopping centres. We're speaking about people who are represented by bid areas. We need to remember that large parts of the conurbation aren't represented by them, there are still those shopping centres and those centres for community which are facing the same issues. So it's been very interesting to raise them through the prism of the bids, but they exist everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green, especially the people that live in the hip, trendy area of Southbourne as well. So, right. On that note, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to other representatives we've had from the various bids. We do also have a representative here, I believe, from the Christchurch Bid Steering Group. So I don't know if you just want to say a few words. We promise we won't ask you any questions, but obviously as a...
Okay, so I'm Martin Ousley and I'm representing the Christchurch Steering Group. There isn't a bid as such at the moment in Christchurch. We're at the very early stages of the development phase. The steering group is made up of a very good cross-section of representative business from the town, the small, medium and large companies. They're meeting once a month to look at to set out the timetable which has been agreed for the development phase, and that culminates with the ballot papers being issued on the 20th of August and hopefully a result being issued on the 18th of September. So we're some months away from that. Operationally, what we've been doing since the 7th of January is consulting with the town centre businesses, largely face-to-face, via the distribution of a newsletter information sheet with a very, very brief survey. And the idea of the survey is to try and get the views of the businesses in the town centre as to what they feel are the most important things that would improve the town centre. And that feedback will provide the initial data to draft a business plan for the bid. And the aim is to have the initial draft business plan completed by the end of April. We will be collecting surveys until the end of February, and we're aiming to get in a minimum of 75, so almost 35–40% perhaps of the businesses that we've consulted with. There will be a second newsletter going out at the end of February giving further information, and we're also holding 3 open business meetings on the 16th of March, 1 breakfast, 1 lunch and 1 evening, to try and get as many businesses along as possible so that they can come along and ask questions and find out as much as they'd like to find out about the bid process and express any concerns that they might have. And that's basically where we're at. We're not analysing the data that we're pulling in as yet because there's not really enough there to go on. We're at the very early stages of the process, but we're hoping over the course of the next 4 to 6 weeks to have a better idea as to what the indicators are in regard to the improvements that the businesses would like to see in the town centre.
Thank you very much for that update to the board, Martin. October, did you say that we'll know? So it's September.
September 20th.
Yeah, so thank you very much, and we wish you the very best of luck indeed.
Thanks very much.
So that concludes our item from hearing from the bids. I didn't extend an opportunity to the Cabinet Member, Councillor Howell, if you would like to say a few words.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate we're overrun, so I have to be very quick. For future meetings, what I'd suggest it might be helpful to build in some time for the portfolio to say things, because it seems there's a lot of discussion about things that the portfolio Holden knows quite a lot about. In terms of rough sleeping, ASB, begging, it's clearly a major issue for both town centres. My perception is that it is worse in Bournemouth. I left here on Friday evening, was asked for money before I got onto the bus, got off at Poole and was asked for money in Poole High Street. I think Thamesley and Poole, ASB bus station, going to the High Street begging, go to the Quay, street drinkers. In Bournemouth, it seems everything's concentrated. All those issues are concentrated in the same place, and that might be something in that. It's something we really need to work very hard to try and address, and I know my colleagues are who are who are responsible for that the relevant portfolio holders. I think I'm somebody that would very much defend councillors' rights and other people's rights to just say it how it is in town centres and elsewhere. I did that when I was in opposition, but I think it's really important to be fair when you do that. and to use facts. And in Poole, I'm struck, having just joined the Bournemouth bid, about how cohesive it seems and how the members of it are, seem to be working very well together. Poole bid has struggled for board members, and the town. Poole has been. It's correct in saying that the Poole has been left uninvested in for so long that as so many people have a kind of inbuilt negative view of it themselves. People who trade in the town centre, have other roles in the town centre. They can't believe that it can get better. And one of the things about the master plan that we're launching is that the purpose is to build that belief and to get stakeholders working together and to deliver a plan for the whole of the town centre, not something piecemeal that people feel that they have seen before and won't work. I don't think that Poole Town Centre is as bad as it's been portrayed. The bus station, actually, ASP has gone down in the last year there. It's a really unfortunate incident, really serious GBH recently, but apparently that a lot of the current issues are down to a single person that the police hope to take off the streets soon. And I just, in terms of other areas, obviously the town centre vision process in Bournemouth we're reinvigorating, and I'd very much like to pick up on Paul's comment about action. And my criticism of the current iteration of the town centre vision is it is all about generalities, and it's not about action and not about how we're going to make things happen. I very much want the Poole Master Plan to be a route plan, essentially, from how you get A to B, and to get the best advice on how to do that. It is not about this could be or that could be. We have to make some real decisions. Obviously got the Boscombe Town Deal bids going in as well. So there are real challenges, but I'd just like to assure everybody that we are working very hard to address them, and I'd like to thank committee members for the various helpful comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howell. Moving on to the next item on the first of our two Overview and Scrutiny Board meetings today, which is item number 8, which is the scrutiny of planning-related cabinet reports. In particular, at the cabinet meeting on the 12th of February 2020, we'll be looking at the Community Infrastructure Levy, that's SIL, Strategic and Neighbourhood Governance. So we've got Councillor Phipps here today, and as usual, we'd welcome very much if you could introduce the report, and then I'll open it up to the board for further comments. Thank you very much. Oh, and Councillor Allison as well. Thank you very much. The floor's yours.
Thank you. If it's all right, I'm just sort of going to present the report, and then possibly Councillor Allison might want to say a few words as well to start us off. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Okay. So, the main purpose of this report is to come up with a fair and equitable way of distributing the neighbourhood portion of SIL receipts across the new merged council. You probably realise, and you all know quite a bit about NSIL, I'm sure it's not an easy process. I mean, having 3 systems at the moment, and we've got to bring everything into one. So the report suggests a way forward. I appreciate there's going to be quite a bit of discussion about this. So the first part of the report, which is paragraphs 8 to 15, just deals with the strategic element of SIL, not the neighbourhood portion. Where we are now required to produce an infrastructure funding statement, an IFS, instead of the previous Regulation 123 list, which sets out which priorities strategic SIL will be spent on. And we've got to do that by December 2020. And at the same time as working on that IFS, we also need to start work on a new charging schedule for the whole of BCP, because all the charges at the moment across the 3 councils are different. So recommendations A and B just seek authorisation to do those works, and they're going to be the subject of future reports. So part 2 of the report, which is paragraph 16 onwards, is about the neighbourhood portion of SIL and how we harmonise the legacy systems of, I'll call it NSIL distribution. So Christchurch is covered now completely by town and parish councils, and the legislation, it tells you in paragraph 18, requires the NSIL of 15%, or if there's a neighbourhood plan, 25%, to be passed directly to those town and parish councils. So that appears to be reasonably straightforward. The main decision is about how to distribute NSIL in the Bournemouth and Poole areas, which currently have 2 different systems. Of the 2 options in the report, option 2, the pooling system, is suggested as being the most consistent approach. And the issues of neighbourhood forums, which have or do not have a neighbourhood plan, are all set out in paragraph 29. So option 2, the pooling system, it has already been operating in Poole, and it's felt that overall the Poole scheme has worked quite successfully. The Bournemouth one has as well, but as an instance, over the legacy period, about 150 projects have been submitted in Poole from a very wide range of community groups, with about £2.5 million being awarded or about to be awarded. In comparison, the Bournemouth system, which is the ward-based scheme, saw around 15 projects funded with around 250,000 released. They've both been very successful, but it was just felt that perhaps the Poole model appeared to have engaged communities a little bit more, and it delivered certain schemes such as the Hamworthy Paddling Pool, the Upton Play Park, and the Turlin Moor Play Park. So the pooling scheme, we believe, does at least mean that communities which at the moment can't raise much money locally can have access to a pool of funding. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion on this. There always is, I think, about allocating money. But we'll do our best to answer your questions, and I think perhaps Lewis might want to say a few words if he wishes.
Thank you very much. So I just want to clarify a little bit. So this briefing paper is joint between myself and Margaret as portfolio holders for planning communities, because the NSIL is organised through those 2 officer bases. So I'm here also to answer any questions that might relate to the community side of the aspect of the NSIL. I'm also really enthusiastically in favour of the pooling model. I think it is much fairer, and it allows us to spend larger amounts of money on bigger projects in areas where our indices of deprivation are sort of the opposite of the areas which raise money from NSIL, if that makes sense. So the areas which are most likely to have developments are those areas which are likely to be the most prosperous areas already, whereas areas which are more likely to have deprivation involved in them in those communities have much smaller levels of development in their areas, and therefore have a much smaller pot to play with, which seems the wrong way round in my opinion. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you. I'll start, if I may. I'm just a little concerned from the off that we might be confusing two very different things. I think the idea of community engagement is obviously great. We want to engage as many communities as possible. And I think nobody would agree more that there are areas of deprivation that need looking after where possible. And certainly the first part of the paper about the larger quantum, if you like, of the infrastructure levy is already within the gift of the council to do what we want to it. What we're talking about in specific, in terms of the options in the paper, is the neighbourhood portion. And the legislation, and indeed in the report, it is quite clear that the SIL regulations require that 15% of the SIL is to be spent on local projects required to support areas where there is development. So the idea is, in those areas where the development happens, that's the ones that have been impacted, and therefore they get a small pot of money to be able to mitigate that development. throwing it into a bigger pot to redistribute to other areas goes completely against the idea of the neighbourhood portion itself, which is to be very specific to the areas that are impacted by the development. So it actually looks more like a cash grab for other areas than it necessarily does to fix the problem that it is there to address. So I just wondered how you, perhaps directed to Councillor Allison first, in how you address the idea of redistribution versus the aim of the neighbourhood portion.
I think it's a very good point. I think obviously the original purpose of the neighbourhood SIL portion was to support infrastructure directly in front of, right in front of where the development is occurring. It's designed to help you with road infrastructure and things like that. I think with the removal of so many other funds, so we've got, local improvement fund wasn't continued, with the removal of all those different pots of money that people are able to apply for, what we're seeing now is that the SIL fund is being used more across the country, not just in BCP, for lots and lots of other different things. And it's quite a common approach to have this pooling model. We're not the only local authority to recommend it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Phipps.
I think we're really, the pool system has been operating and has been working, as well as the ward system, as you put it. And we've had a look at these two, and we've also had a look at other things that have happened around the country. And some others do like a hybrid system. There's all sorts of complicated things that go on. So it isn't specifically that any area, it is a choice, I think, as to whether the money is specifically in the area of development, is spent there or not. Also, for instance, one area might have loads and loads of development and have an absolute huge pot of money, and then not have anything to spend it on, or not an awful lot to spend it on, and the money is just sitting there. And that is what can tend to happen, not always. And that money could be used in a wider context for people that in that area where the building has taken place, they're going to use the community facilities that are actually then produced by the SIL money, such as the play parks just outside the area, in other areas. So we just felt it was a more equitable, just a fairer way, really, of doing it. But obviously we're open to discussion on that.
Thank you very much. And it is generating discussion by the number of people I've got indicating already. So it's a good job we're not running behind time. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one point of clarification to start with, if you don't mind. Then I'd like to come back to a couple of points. Are there some areas where SIL is not charged? For example, town centre? Or I believe that there are some areas where SIL is not charged. Maybe that's one for Head of Planning.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's not entirely consistent.
Okay, which adds added complexity into the way it works, because if some areas are not being charged still, but they'd be, under a pooled arrangement, they'd be allowed to bid into it. So it does add that complexity. And taking up on the point the Chair made, under the pool, the whole idea, and it says in paragraph 5 of the report that the council must engage with the communities where the development has taken place. It's not a possibly, it is a must. That's part of the way that the SIL thing is structured. So, it's difficult to see how it can necessarily work in that way if it's pooled and areas are being ignored, even though, development may be taking place in there. It also sort of takes the emphasis away from the locality in terms of the ward councillors, because it's sort of divesting it to another committee or something to decide what it's going to do, which means the localism aspect of it is denuded in a way, particularly as the LIF, which I'm glad that Councillor Allison has mentioned. The LIF at least enabled councillors to keep in touch to a very limited degree, I accept, with the community in offering small amounts of assistance within the community. So it was very useful. So, and
I actually think that the sill is, whilst it's not quite as flexible as the lift, is another mechanism for helping the engagement of the council with the local community. So I think it's very important locally. Now, if there were a lift element of a community infrastructure levy, then I'd be very interested in that, because both needs could be made, a kind of a hybrid type arrangement where, you know, there would be some flexibility with the local councillors and the community, but still enabling a kind of a pooling arrangement for maybe bigger projects. I don't know. So as it stands at the moment, I would not be in favour actually of a hard over pooled arrangement, because I think that there are too many other issues associated with the need to keep things local, which I think does actually meet what the legislation is about, as opposed to the pooling arrangement.
Thank you very much. Councillor Phipps.
I appreciate what you're saying, fine. However, obviously, everybody and the area where the development takes place, they can bid into the pot. So maybe they should have priority. But if there's a pot, you know, it's there with the money in, and everybody is able to bid into that pot. So, you know, nobody's being disadvantaged as such, if you see what I mean.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. I think a big part of this is looking at risk. That's why the ONS board is one of the primary purposes to be here. Now, I don't know. I'd like to ask a question on both parts, both the strategic and the neighbourhood side of things, because the strategic is a huge part, and I very much welcome the fact that we have to put together a structured infrastructure plan, so that everybody can see what's actually happening for the benefit of development anywhere within the three towns. But the neighbourhood side of things, and I've got a bit of a concern on that, and I'll just raise it just now. The scuttlebutt before I became a member was that some developers would actually do a backhander into the sill, so that they didn't have to fulfil their absolute requirements as regards affordable housing or a certain percentage of such and such, because that was a backhander. But it's just something which, if I hear that as a member of the public before I become a member, then it's certainly something which I think the new administration should be aware of. On the subject of risk, it's about public perception. You just have to read the Bournemouth Echo or be in your own wards to understand that are outside of the areas of major development, is that people go, Bournemouth Town Centre, getting the money again. All the development in Bournemouth Town Centre, what do we get? And public perception is quite important in bringing the three towns together, because we are a new authority, we are the BCP, and the idea behind the BCP is that we look at the strategic overall image for our conurbation, because we serve all 400,000 residents equally, as opposed to the good fortune of what particular area that they live in as regards development. What I think is quite interesting, and I would support wholeheartedly option 2 for that public perception side of things, is the work that's been done into the study as regards how SIL has been used previously. And one of the things I've learned as a new member coming into a new administration and coming into a new authority is that this unifying, as we call it, of bringing the three towns together is a very, very important part. And the fact that pool, and it doesn't matter what area, and I sit on a number of committees in the chair's absence, is that we take the best from those towns which had a legacy policy. Now, it seems to me that if Poole are knocking out 120 different projects and X amount of million, 2 million from their SIL funding, compared to Bournemouth, which I think you said was 15, there seems to be the best way to use the neighbourhood SIL seems to be demonstrated in Poole, as opposed to demonstrated in the former authority of Bournemouth. So my concern here is the risk to public perception. Is if we make a recommendation as regards the neighbourhood portion for the 400,000 residents that are not in a development area, then it will be the same old story once again. All the money pouring into the town centre, but we're not seeing anything here. And I commend, was it Upworthy for the paddling pool and the Hamworthy, sorry. There you go. My mix up on the ward names is because those play parks, particularly accessible play parks, have a huge impact, and it's something which the council and the authority as a whole demonstrates that we are actually interested in all our communities. So I would strongly support option 2, whereby all of those communities get an opportunity to bid upon the money which is given by developers. The last part, if you please, Chair, on risk, is that, reading through the paperwork, is that I have a concern that what's to stop, if we go the wrong way, what's to stop the villages, as was referred to, creating their own town council, and in that way they can grab the 15%, 25%, whatever, such as Christchurch has, and then they control that themselves, rather than the council having an overview as regards distributing the money fairly. So I know that we want further engagement and we want to devolve power down to our communities, and one of those ways is to actually have town councils. So an element of risk here is that if the neighbourhood SIL is not, distributed in what is perceived as a fair way, then local areas, perhaps Folkestone, create their own town centre, their town council, or a parish council, and there's nothing to stop them doing that, statutory as far as I'm aware, but I'm new to this game, but there is a risk there, is as an authority, if we are perceived to be putting all the money into one or two areas of the town rather than distributing them, then we will fragment our towns into further councils, further town councils and further distraction. So it's about risk for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Farquhar. Apologies for running off, but if you ever get a phone call from your kid's school, you always know it's a good idea to answer it. So, Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think first of all, I'll just say that it's a little bit difficult being a town councillor when it comes to particularly for applications for development, because whereas almost every other councillor in BCP finds themselves, whenever they go to a planning committee, they're fighting to stop a development because that's what their residents want. We also are asked by our residents to try to stop the development, but we don't see it that way because we look at what is right for BCP. And so we're very much at odds against our residents who don't want to see development taking place, but we are promoting it because exactly as we heard from the bid this morning, it feels like this morning, but earlier this afternoon, and as Councillor Brooke pointed out particularly, there is real benefit on concentrating development in the town centres, particularly from transport point of view, but generally also we as a borough have a huge commitment to introduce extra housing. If it's not in the town centres, it will need to be somewhere else, and we can accommodate it in the town centres, whereas there are other wards particularly that will struggle to do that. And again, Margaret, you'll know how strongly many people in Christchurch oppose over-intensification or further intensification there. So we're coming up against our residents, whereas you're not. But I do think there's a few bits and pieces that maybe haven't been understood properly on there. The first is related to that, which is the whole idea of the SIL, the neighbourhood part of the SIL, is to say, as the chairman mentioned in his introductory part of this, that where there is development, there are costs of that development to the infrastructure. There is a need to be putting money in to make up for the fact that that development is going ahead and there are more people in that area. Let's not forget either, and again, I think maybe Councillor Farquhar, when you're talking about the distribution and people having the opportunity to bid in, two things. First of all, 75% in most places, 85% in most places, and 75% in other places of that developer's contribution go into a central pool, which can be bid into. This is something that councils can do. They can allocate that money. They can redirect, if a paddling pool doesn't fit the bill, they can redirect that towards part of the infrastructure to free up council money for the paddling pool. It is that 75 to 85% is available. We're only talking about that 15 to 25%. The next thing that maybe isn't quite understood is it doesn't have to be immediately outside that development. That's the Section 106 money that I think that Councillor Allison may be referring to, not the neighbourhood sill. That is there for the infrastructure of that particular area to make up for the addition to that area of the number of people. And also the idea about pooling generally being available in the Bournemouth scheme at the moment. I think it's paragraph 16 says Bournemouth operates a ward system where the NSIL collected in the ward is allocated and ring-fenced to be spent only in that ward. That is not the case. We have the opportunity for wards, whether adjacent or not adjacent, to work together and to pool their own resources. So that would easily take account of the situation that Margaret, that you suggested, where people from one ward would be using the facilities that SIL could be employed for a small distance outside that ward. We would be very happy in the town centre to be looking at other options if they were to benefit the new residents that are coming in and to make up for that. So I think all of these are there, and again I would just concentrate and just finish by saying what the purpose is of the neighbourhood element of SIL, and it's very clear there in paragraph 5. The SIL regulations require that 15% of SIL is to be spent on local projects required to support areas where there is development. The other 75 to 85% isn't. That 15 to 25% is. And that really is where it should stay, subject to the voluntary pooling arrangements which will be organised by ward councillors.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. Councillor Phipps?
Okay, first thing I just come back to is you mentioned the 75 to 85% that actually can be pooled for other things, but actually that is not the neighbourhood portion. That is and there is going to be an infrastructure funding statement about that. That's for wider infrastructure, but it's not for communities, I don't think, to bid into for local projects. It's a wider thing, and there will be a priority list, which is the infrastructure funding statement, which will list priorities, and there will be communication on that and consultation, in a wider consultation on that. We're going to come back to that. As you know, there'll be another report coming out on that. But we're talking here about the neighbourhood portion, and that is a wider infrastructure thing. You're talking about paragraph 5 as well, for it being spent locally, and I think here there is what is the actual definition of local. I mean, I think we've perhaps been down this route before, when Bournemouth, Christchurch, and Poole were sort of put together as to what is local, what isn't local. Has it got to be within a defined ward, or can it be a bit further? I'm not really sure what is defined, whether there's an actual definition of local. And when you come to paragraph 16, it does actually say it was spent only in that ward, and you're saying that's not correct. And I perhaps would like, I'm sorry to put you on the spot and ask you to mention, to perhaps clarify that. Thank you.
Councillor Green is correct on that point, where the starting point is actually it should go to the ward, and that would be the starting point for discussions. But if wards wanted to get together, then there could be some transfer across. I don't think it ever happened, but that provision did exist or does exist.
Thank you very much. I've got a number of speakers, and so I'll scoot through. Councillor Earl.
Thank you. I think a lot of it comes down to definitions of area and definitions of local, because they're such arbitrary terms. In my ward, for example, all the kids go and play in this play park, but it is just over the boundary into the next ward over. So, as long as we can define it properly as being on a ward basis or not. But for me, with a ward by ward basis, distribution is a lot clearer. But I think when it comes to the pooling method and the sheer volume of engagement that takes place in that, it's a real winner, just by getting so many people involved and being able to tick that box on strengthening community engagement and empowering communities to do what they want with money that's available to them. I think that does really help. However, I was wondering whether there would, I know we don't really have a clear assessment criteria yet, and that's going to come down the line, but do you think there would be any safeguards in place to make sure that this neighbourhood portion of SIL could be distributed more evenly across areas. Because what I wouldn't want is if it comes down to a member group and we've got this large area from Bournemouth all the way across to Poole, and money can be spent anywhere across there and it's just chosen by the members, would they be taking into consideration that there should be distribution across the areas, or would it purely be up to them to decide completely?
The answer is basically yes. That's within the gift of the setup to have that. I think it's important to recognise what it says in the legislation, the guidance around development in the area. It's a bit different in terms of the Poole and Bournemouth area because it's not defined in the legislation. So it's very much up to the council to define that geography. So therefore, it's for this council to decide that. But in the setup, I think it would be important for the criteria to have something in there to make sure that the distribution does reflect broad areas of development and pressures which emerge. So I think that's something which this committee or cabinet might want to have a look at. But it certainly can be done in the setup because that's all to come henceforth.
It's going. That's it. Just to add to that, we do have current criteria where in different areas where how decisions are made. There are criteria at the moment, but that will just continue for the moment until we get this other piece of this organised. We are going to consult on the setting up of how the system will work. That's what is going to actually happen. So there is an opportunity for there to be input into the setup, as you're suggesting, and as Nick has said. So we can make sure that there will be another report coming back, and you would have an opportunity to look at that before anything is put in place, and we could look at what the criteria are and how they are implemented.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you. So initially I was a little bit sceptical of the pooling model, but I've the more I've read this paper, the more I've come in support of it. And my initial scepticism was kind of based on the wards and the money being collected and being used as locally possible in the neighbourhood. And the town centre councillor, my ward does quite well for getting money for community projects. But then I also live on the corner of my ward. So over the road, I've got neighbours who are in Wallerstown ward. On the other side, I've got people in Talbot and Branksome Woods. And if they come to me with a problem, I'm not going to say, oh, no, sorry, go and see somewhere else. I'll just do my best to sort it out. So it does come down to a bit like what Councillor Eyre was saying about how big is your neighbourhood and what do you talk about when you say your neighbourhood. And I think the idea that this could actually encourage community groups to come together and put together neighbourhood plans would be really, really beneficial for everywhere across the conurbation, really, and people can decide on what their neighbourhood is, what it encapsulates, what they want the funding to go towards. And if we can help encourage that in a way, then we definitely should be trying to do that. And the other thing, again, Councillor L, you pretty much asked the same thing I was going to ask, and that would there be a threshold to stop certain areas sort of taking a lot of the funding if we were trying to do it? Would we be splitting this equally or looking at where it's best to be used and making sure that areas don't miss out? Thank
you. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going back to the beginning, this is about the 15% neighbourhood proportion, assuming that for places that are either unparished or don't have their neighbourhood plans. I'm sorry to be basic about this, but it's to do with development in the area. I am very concerned that this is the pooling suggestion is to be driven by community groups, because there are a lot of areas who don't have community groups. To those who do, all power to your elbow, absolutely. But as ward councillors, and certainly in my previous ward, and pretty much in my present ward, there was no community group which was sufficiently mature, nor had the willing volunteers nor had any other route other than through their ward councillors to make their needs known. And it was very much my job, it continues to be my job as a ward councillor to do that. Where there are community groups, absolutely, we should be working with them and we should be supporting them. But I think this proposal, the option 2 proposal, really does work against you if you are not an organised community group. There seems to be I note what you're saying, that there will be further work, but there seems to be no governance implied about going back to the central principle of this is where the development, this should be in the area where the development is. Just because that area doesn't have a mature community representation outside their perfectly appropriate democratic one, it doesn't mean that they don't have needs. And it doesn't mean that they're not impacted on by the development. So, for example, we have, my colleague Councillor Beasley is no longer here, but we have been entirely supportive of an 80-bed development of a mixed-use homes in Westbourne. We absolutely see the need for this, as the other Councillor Green was saying about the town centre, but in Westbourne, we know that we have the job to do to accept housing in there. We know with that housing there will come needs. We are actively trying to get a mixed community there, and I will tell you, one of the first things that I need to be doing is saying, take a look at our play space. Yes, we've got the beach nearby, but you can't always get there, and that's not where the development is. We need to make sure that the routes to school for those people who are going to be coming into the community are there before they get there, and it needs to come out of the development. And that's not a worked up example, that's just a for instance of what might happen with developments that are coming through. And so this is our job to get ahead of those needs. I do believe that that option 1 gives those opportunities for pooling, and indeed I would welcome the leads that we should encourage that, and we really should seek to work together. But I think we are losing too much by going to a pooled example with no assurance that it is directly related to the development. And I would just like to pick up on Councillor Allison's point about the just because you've got a development there. Sorry. Reading my notes and not trying to misquote you, but essentially there are areas of deprivation which do not have development going on. You're right. You're absolutely right. Later on, we're looking at the net revenue budget of £283 million, which is the council's opportunity to pull those levers. We might not agree about how it's done, but that is the appropriate lever within that budget, within everything else that the council does, to be addressing the deprivation. There are other ways of doing it than from the scant resources, which are meant to go very locally to an area for this. There is the LTP, which will deal with other necessary road developments, and that will be on a needs base. The Parks investment budget will also deal with those other things. There are many parts of other capital programmes which quite rightly will be needs driven. They will be choices made quite properly, whether we agree with them or not. They will be democratic decisions, and that's the right way to do it. But I'm afraid I don't find that this paper is the right way to be doing that. I think the amounts are small in the overall scheme of things, but actually to our communities, when this is about the refurbishment of a playground, Councillor Bartlett and I used to wave at one another across the corner of Red Hill Common. You know, we are quite capable of working together. We understand where those needs are, and so for that reason, and whatever we decide later on this evening, I'm afraid I would like to make the move, Chairman, that we go for option 1 in this.
So you'd like to put a recommendation to replace recommendation D and agree option 1 in its place?
Yes, but sorry, if I could just pick up on the portfolio holder's point about the governance needs some working out. It might perhaps have been better if we'd done the consultation before we got to this, but I do recognise that further tweaking does need to be done, so I'm entirely happy for that to be done outside of this meeting.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, I'm very pleased to second that, but one other issue I'd just like to raise very quickly is about the neighbourhood forums, which is mentioned in here. Of course, the future of neighbourhood forums is not yet agreed, so I'm not sure we should be addressing the SIL issues for the neighbourhood forums in this paper. So maybe that's something that should be taken out of the paper at this time. I don't know. But yeah, I'm happy to second.
Thank you very much. We have a move which has been duly seconded. Any commentary on the Councillor Green?
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder whether I can just suggest a slightly amended wording that was for, in D, rather than just replace the words agree that option 2, change that to agree that option 1. If we could put recognising the opportunity for wards to pool resources if they wish to, comma, agree that option 1.
Councillor Other Green.
As the mover, I'm happy to concede to that. Thank you.
Good, no domestic. And Councillor Bartlett?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Any comments on the motion? Councillor Mabon.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to speak out against the amendment because as somebody whose ward is quite disenfranchised, we have some significant areas of deprivation. We've got heathland limiting development. The potential for the pooling option to have a real significant impact on my ward is massive. We don't have the ability to generate such large portion of SIL. However, we are impacted by other local developments. So the pooling model recognises that it's not simply within ward that impact happens. So, for example, in my ward where there's development in the city centre, at the university, there is massive increase in through traffic through my ward. That said, I do agree with Councillor Green that where communities are disenfranchised, that they do need to have an opportunity to engage and bid, and it would be very reassuring to know that there's oversight to ensure that the cross-conurbation distribution is there. But certainly I don't agree with the amendment, and I would be in support of the pooling model.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. I am speaking about this amendment, and it's just to give a bit of background for other members that may not experience the ward-based model. So in my old ward of Kingston South, under the Bournemouth Council, we had a fair few successful bids that went in. And for example, we always had the opportunity to work with colleagues, and going forward, Councillor Barlow is a neighbouring ward of mine, and if there was something we could talk about and work with, absolutely, why not? That's a great thing to do. It doesn't just get people working across wards, but across political boundaries, all sorts of things. It's great. It breaks down all these barriers. The other thing is one of the most proud applications we made in Kingston South was we match funded. So we went in first with a local football club who maintain a field. They do all the work, completely voluntary. They're fantastic. We got equipment, match funded it up to 20 grand. So we went for 5, other people came in. So it isn't just working with other ward councils and other SILT pots. You can then actually go a step further and work with other organisations outside that. And we did that managing what we knew we had in our pot. And for me, representing Kingston now, which is still in the top 10% of deprived wards in England, I would wholeheartedly want to be looking at the option 1, because it does safeguard what we can do for our most deprived residents, and we can get the most out of it. And option 2, I just worry that we will not see that same return and that other hard work that we get with not just working within the SIL remit, but going beyond that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Phipps, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to come in on areas with no community groups. I mean, that shouldn't really disadvantage them at all, because, as you say, that's what ward councillors are there for. Obviously, you've got a very good idea of what goes on in your ward, what sort of thing might be required in your ward. So, you can put something together, or it doesn't have to be a specific community group. Also, you can still work together with other councillors. Even if there's a pooled fund, why can't you work with other councillors? Or if a councillor somewhere else wants something and you think that it would work, you can work together on it, absolutely. I totally agree with that. The problem I see with the ward model, mainly, is that some areas will have huge amounts of money because they have such a lot of development, but they don't seem always able to spend it, and it kind of sits there, and it probably could be used for other projects across the whole area that would still benefit people within their ward, because they would go out and use these facilities, but it's not being spent, and that is what is happening to some degree at the moment with the ward model as I understand it.
Thank you very much. There might be other reasons why some SIL hasn't been spent to date, but we won't go into that. Colleagues, we have 15 minutes where we're supposed to get through 4 items, which is obviously not going to happen. We are going to be overrunning, but we do have a move on the table and a seconder, and we could go around this for ages, but I'm strongly considering whether to, unless I get a tsunami of opposition, whether to gauge the level on this one and take this to a vote so that we can try and get to the other items in front of us. So on that note, we have a proposal to amend recommendation D, with the wording has been put forward to us, and a seconder. Councillor Brooke.
Or are you drawing it to a conclusion now?
Well, I was trying to.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of concerns. I'm trying to... I've got this problem of bias predetermination as a result of my declaration, and I'm trying to avoid coming down on one side or the other. I think, personally, there are issues with both proposals, and I think where one has in the debate so far excluded linking the IFS with the NSIL, there is a case for doing that, and it would impact on everything that's been discussed at this stage. So I am, without being able to go into that, because you're wanting to vote on this amendment, puts me in a very difficult position in terms of actually voting on this one without...
Fully understood.
But I
yes.
do want to vote.
Okay. Well, it's your decision, Councillor Brooke, but I think it's wise that you've put the caveat in front of that. Colleagues... Councillor Inger?
Half a minute.
Is it to do with... Okay, go on then.
I think there is something around getting around the speakers faster, if I may, please. In support of the amendment, I think the 80% has been de-scoped from this discussion unnecessarily. I think it's a highly relevant part of this discussion, which Councillor Green mentioned across the way. I think literally when we talk about some of the sensitivity in part of this, we've got to be thinking of the whole pot, not just the neighbourhood part. That would actually help us see through all of this. Second thing is, as one of the, one of the ward councillors who puts a load in the pot, the ward wouldn't be asking for all the money to be spent in the ward for what's generated in the ward. People are reasonable. I'd credit my ward residents with being actually showing a bit of class about this and actually not being appropriate in their requests about what is spent locally in this. There will be reasonableness in all of this. The definition is important. My ward is constantly a building site, all day, every day, throughout the year. People do have needs in the ward. I think that I'd like that to be respected. And finally, the last thing is that the proof of this will be in the pudding. I don't think, as a challenge to the PFH, we can sort of say the policy is one thing and then we'll decide how it will work later on. Actually, these things all need to be worked together. People will judge this, how well it actually works, notwithstanding what the policy is to start with. It's all got to come together. I will support the amendment on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be very, very brief. I think that the concern as to why option 1 may not be acceptable is because you'll have areas where they don't generate any SIL or very little SIL. Just wanted to go back to the previous iteration of before SIL came in, which was section 106. They were ward-based, but what would happen, certainly I'm only speaking from the pool experience, is that any unspent 106 within a ward, if it's deemed that there is a project elsewhere within the borough that needed funding, money was actually transferred across. So I don't see why a similar arrangement can't work because the portfolio holder had expressed concern that the money will just sit there. Well, if there's a worthy project in Councillor Maidman's ward or Councillor Earl's ward, and there is money sitting in another ward, NSIL money, there is no reason why a discussion can't be had and the money can be moved across. So I would be supporting the amendment.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have an amendment and a second which has been duly seconded. Final comment from me, which is a message that Councillor Nicola Green mentioned earlier on. It is about engagement, and the hope and the aim of putting these recommendations forward is to try and improve things. And Cabinet, to its great credit, has taken a number of these on board. And I recognise that when you present a binary choice, often it's the one in the middle which is the best all round. And perhaps there is some common ground that we can light on this one, but as Councillor Nicola Green said earlier, engagement should generally be done before the event rather than after the event. So that was my only comment on it, but hopefully we can try and come to some agreement that works well for everyone. But we do have a recommendation to amend the recommendation in front of us. Could I have a show of hands for all those who are in favour of the recommendation?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in favour.
All of those who are against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against.
Chair, if I may, could I have my vote recorded?
Yes, absolutely, no problem. And any abstentions? Great. Thank you very much. Hopefully we can, there's a full discussion, but I think everyone's heart is in the right place in wanting to spend the money correctly, and we will take that to Cabinet and see whether there is any common ground to be found in there. Thank you very much to Councillor Allison and to Councillor Phipps. Moving swiftly along to item 9, which is a scrutiny of corporate-related Cabinet reports. No, how are we moving? Is it? So it is? Yes, it is, but we've moved things around, which is the scrutiny of regeneration-related Cabinet reports, and that will be Councillor Howell. We have 2 items in Wednesday's Cabinet, which is the Bournemouth Town Centre Vision Winter Garden site, and secondly the York Road site. So hopefully we can go through those in brisk detail. But I'll open it up to Councillor Howell. Shall we take the Winter Gardens paper first? Thank you, Councillor Howell.
Yes. This essentially is a technical paper that makes various variations to allow the continuation of the Winter Gardens development project. I think most people have seen the proposed development. It essentially consists of 4 apartment stroke commercial blocks on the Winter Gardens car park. They are very technical. The first recommendation here is in relation to a £3.4 million loan, which is the council's loan, but because of the current ranking of the repayment structure, it appears too early in the repayment, essentially, to be able to attract further funding that we need in order to be able to build out the development. So essentially, what this proposes is to drop the council's interest further down the repayment schedule, so we can allow investors to take their share of to be repaid what is due to them before the council takes what is due to it. The second item is increasing the length of the long lease, which it says from 150 years to 250 years or longer. It may well be longer, and this is to reflect change in market conditions. 150 years now apparently is considered to be too short to be investable. In the advance sum payment, this Morgan Sindall, the investment partner in BDC with the council, actually puts money in advance into the project, which funds various early preparatory measures in preparation of the scheme. Because the scheme has been expanded, that needs to be increased to some degree. And the final one is a change to the option execute date. Because of the complexity of the scheme, we're allowing a little bit more time for the complications to be to be dealt with. Yeah, I mean, I'd stress that this is not a decision as to whether to go ahead or stop the scheme. The scheme has already got planning permission. To stop it at this stage would result in compensation to Morgan Sindall somewhere down the line, at least, if not now. And we essentially facilitating the continuation of the process by this decision if we make this decision.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howell. Following on from Councillor Howell's points, I'd reiterate to board members exactly the same point. This is very much a detailed paper regarding some of the mechanics behind the structure rather than necessarily a wider strategy. So where possible, if I'd urge members to keep the focus on issues that they may have within that rather than dissecting the whole thing. Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And first of all, to say that fully supportive of both the project and basically everything that Councillor Howell's just said. But also just to point out that after the ward boundary changes, it's entirely within Central and not within the other Councillor Green's ward of Westbourne. It does say that on the front of the paper. I have two questions which I hope Councillor Howells will be able to answer, but otherwise maybe somebody else. I know Martin Tiffin's had to go. But the first is on paragraph 16, which talks about the way of funding broadly, and the one that I'm just concerned about is the last one, the forward funding / sale for the public car park, and rather than the commercial and retail space, that second part of it. In many cases, that means that we would be looking effectively for somebody to buy the car park from us and pay for it in advance as it's brought forward. I would feel very concerned if this were to be moving out of council hands, and particularly the decision as to what price to put on parking was in the hands of a private investor rather than the council. Can you assure me that that would not be the case? That would be my first question. I have one other.
What I would say is certainly I wouldn't consider that to be desirable. I think that we should be running our own public car parks. Both these papers have been delayed substantially, as you will be aware, because of both our financial and legal officers need to just make sure that they, essentially, for them to be happy with the way that we're going forward. One aspect of this is meeting the funding requirements of the scheme, and therefore, all the options here are being considered as part of, clearly identifying, making sure that we have options in terms of funding. But I certainly would say that we should, I think, be running those car parks because they should be profitable car parks, and if they're not, question why are we building them? That does open up another discussion, which is about one-for-one replacement of car parking spaces in Bournemouth, which is a policy that may not last much longer. But I think that's all the assurance I can give you. I mean, Bill Cotton, I think, is the officer who has volunteered to assist me today. So.
And just for clarity, I don't know if I need to declare an interest, but I'm one of the council representatives on the board. Sorry, I'm one of the council representatives along with Councillor Mike Brooke, who sits on the BDC. I don't know if that counts a conflict of interest, but I'm there representing the council and acting on the council's behalf at those board meetings. Just to give a bit more flesh on the bone there to answer Councillor Green's question. It talks about here the forward sale of the public car park. As I said, ideally the council will run that car park and will have the opportunity to purchase that car park. But if the council didn't want to purchase it or take it forward, the option is there for a third party to come forward and buy it.
Councillor Green.
Thank you. My point on that is that clearly there may be some policy changes, etc. But I think it is important for the town centre that the council effectively controls what the pricing is, which can reflect whichever policy the council wants to push forward on that. The second question was on paragraph 31, which is regards a loan that's in there from Morgan Sindall, which charges 5.5% above 3-month LIBOR, which at the moment is very low, but that's still 6.2%. Whereas elsewhere in the paper it does talk about the advance notes from the council only attracting 2.98% as a fixed rate. I understand that there are obviously, it looks to me, and I might be wrong, as though these are similar seniority in debt, which therefore seems that Morgan Sindall are getting an extremely good deal compared with the council. In fact, it's an extremely good deal in any case, because this is almost a riskless loan, because there's the reputation of the council that forms part of the BDC's work as well. So I'd like to know why Morgan Sindall are receiving 6.2, 6.5, or 6.25% at the moment going forward, and we're only receiving 2.98%. And to check that if it is the case that it's a different class of loan and therefore needs to be at development rates, then why wouldn't we first be offering it to the Treasury Management Department of the Council rather than offering it to Morgan Sindall?
Well, my understanding of these advance sums is that this is a contribution by Morgan Sindall. There's not an equivalent by the council, and it is put in there to fund as the early works, essentially. As to the percentage rate, maybe I'll pass that over to Bill. I would assume that is set in stone.
Yeah. So thank you, Councillor. So yes, that original rate that was agreed when the contract was signed many years ago to put an interest rate on that advance sum, that's been long agreed. In terms of the amount of money that we get from the that we're able to charge interest, that is matched. So so Morgan Sindall Investments will be getting the same amount of interest as us, which is that 2.8% on the further equity that goes in.
Sorry, Chairman, that either doesn't quite explain or doesn't quite satisfy me on it, because we at the council have put in a loan at 2.98%. So we had the opportunity to loan. As far as I remember from the detail, there was no necessity for it to go for the forward loan. For the loan advance to come from Morgan Sindall at 5.5% plus LIBOR. And we could choose to find alternative funders for that, one being the Council Treasury Department.
Well, I think it's all been. I think it's all the contract's been agreed. We can. Can I get Paul to come and whisper in my ear? Yeah. Can you explain that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think
it is a bit hyper detailed, but I think it probably is quite interesting.
I think you're equating two loans which are not equal. Yeah. Because I think the 3.4, both that we put that in and Morgan Sindall put that in, and the advance sum is an additional loan for a different purpose.
Correct. Yeah.
But the point about the interest.
Both 3.4s are 2.98%.
Yeah. But how was the advance sum interest arrived at?
So the advance sum is it was agreed in the contract back when it was signed in 2010 or whenever it was, 2009. The 3.4 we're talking about was as a land purchase which we've agreed to have at the same rate as Morgan Sindall.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I've got a number of points, so I'd just like to pick up on the one that Councillor Green made, because I picked that up too, because what we're looking for is the advance, an increase in the advance, which is subject to the 5.5 plus LIBOR rate. But still, although interest rates have changed, we're looking at funding the additional advance at the same interest rate, which is significant. If you look at the compound rate over the period that that loan will be, the costs are very significant in terms of the interest cost of the project. I mean, it could be in the order of £2.5 million. I don't know. I did a fact calculation.
I think you're. I think sorry, Kat, I think you're mistaken there. So, the amount of money that we're talking about, the 5%, is just on the advanced sums. So the advanced sums are up to, at the moment, about 4. I think we're going up to about 4 million. So a 5% of 4 million is.
Yeah, but that presumably is compounded year on year, and it's over, I don't know what period, 6 or 7 years, something like that.
Well, it's been over about 2 years, and it'll be over about another. Well, we'll be soon, hopefully, in the next year, getting to construction phase. It'll only be for about another year.
So the advance sum is paid off prior to sale out of the development.
Becomes a loan note.
It becomes a loan note, so the debt is not paid down at that point. It continues as a loan note at a different interest rate. Is that what you're saying?
It stays in as a loan note and is picked up towards the end of the development. Yeah.
So there will be for the first period, from what you're saying, that from the first period, the advance sum will attract an interest rate of about 6.3% until such times as that initial expenditure is spent, and then the loan continues at a different rate up until the time the building is sold. Is that correct?
Or is it the same rate?
I think it's the same rate, Paul. Yeah. Come on, no, you come up. Yeah.
Yes, Paul.
It's pretty easy.
Get to the bottom of this.
We're getting technical.
Hi. There's two different elements. So the advanced sums at 5.5 of LIBOR, that is the council's put the land in, so that's the comparison there. When the scheme's fully determined, they'll turn into loan notes equal and opposite between the council and Morgan Sindall. The 3.4 that's mentioned here has been matched equally by Morgan Sindall. So that's the two elements that move forward equally. So both parties are equally committed and equally rewarded.
Sorry, but I understand the issue. There are two lots of funding here. The first 3.4 for the Morgan Sindall and the council was about buying the land, essentially.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
The advance sum is being used to fund the drawing, the planning, and
correct,
getting everything
correct.
in place. Okay.
Yeah.
So when does the advance sum get repaid? Just tell me, and at what interest rate will it attract, and over what period?
It attracts interest across the period it's been lent. It gets repaid at the end because it turns into a loan note, a member's loan note, at the end when all other loan notes are repaid. Third parties will get paid first. Additional member sums will get paid second. Member loans get paid third. Then equity share is the final payment.
So as I said, the 6.3 interest rate will apply to the advance sum right up until when the building is actually sold out.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And in that case, if you look at those figures, it's a significant amount of interest which could be funded in a different way to attract less cost. Because at the end of the day, it's going to become a cost to the project.
Can I just come on this point? You say it could be funded in a different way, but actually we're talking about funding that goes in at a very early stage in when the scheme is quite speculative. So actually, are you going to really get a low rate of interest then? And if the council uses its own funding, are you into questions of state aid? I must say that this is an agreement we as an administration inherited and not designed. So
okay, I mean we are getting into a bit of detail here, but it is a very important point because it's the overall cost of the development here, and what we're actually seeing now is an increase in the advance, therefore the interest rate will advance. And there is a significant increase also in the advance sum. It's going from 3 million now to 4.9 million. Now, I understand that the development is bigger and therefore attracts more work. But if you look at the figure, the actual figure increase is 63% in the advance sum. Have I got that wrong? I think I've got that wrong. But the construction budget, for example, has gone up 37%. But the value of the development has only gone up 25%. So there seems to be a disproportionate amount of additional cost without a proportionate increase in the value. And also, of course, that does have the effect. If you see, originally the construction budget was at 77 million, now going up to 106 million, and an increase of 1.9 million pound on the advance sum. You know, there's quite a change here from, and I accept what you're saying. If the contract actually says, you know, at the beginning it's 5.5 plus LIBOR for the whole duration, fine. But that, of course, is based on what the assumed construction budget will be, not on a progressively increasing construction budget. So I think that there should be room to renegotiate those interest payments because they will be significant. Should we move on from that point?
I think so. If we could draw that to it, there may be further discussions that have to be had on this. There's a lot of expertise in the room. But have you got any other points you wish to raise, Councillor?
Well, I've got a lot of points, but in the interest of brevity and for the purpose of understanding that this is not a decision necessarily to proceed with this development, this is to now the process to continue, as explained by Councillor House. So I'm not going to go into the other areas about whether there are concerns about the development itself. But I do think the issue over the interest rates paid for the advance loan is a real one, and I think it does need to be addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly assure you that we'll have a look at that and make sure we double check the position.
Yeah. Councillor Butler.
Just one final one, if you wouldn't mind. The land value, is it valued before or after planning consent is made? And do you have any idea what the residual value of the land will be at project completion?
Yeah, so you're right. It's what they call a residual land value. So it's calculated at the end of the development after you've paid for all the costs and et cetera, and taken a profit share out and all the rest of it, and what's left over is the land value. We're obviously, it's a dynamic project. We're working on it on terms of how much the value is, how much the construction costs are, what all the things are. At the moment, there is a positive land value.
Thank you very much. I've made the suggestion once. I'll make it a number of times. If members do have particular areas of expertise that they may wish to look at, either as a rapporteur or as a separate small working group, we do have it within our remit to look at that, particularly for these finer issues where there may be areas of expertise. So perhaps worth considering. On this or any future items of interest. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the board on this item? No, again, as we've explored, it is detailed, but it is predominantly about the background of this development. But it sounds like there's some perhaps extra work to be done behind the scenes. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I mean, there are some very fundamental points about the way this is funded and what the outcomes for the council are likely to be. In a way, by agreeing for this process to proceed, it's tantamount to saying, okay, it's too difficult to stop, and it is what it is, and we have to move forward with it. But I do think that we really need to explore in detail the funding mechanisms and what the outcomes for the council are likely to be in financial terms, as well actually in overall benefit terms for the town, although that's probably a different debate. But I think the financial issues of it, in terms of looking, this is the first time I've seen this, just a couple of days ago, and I've never had a chance to even understand how the BDC system worked, and it is complex. So it's for us to, as a committee, to try to get our head round some very important issues in a very short space of time with very little expertise. It's difficult, and these are really big decisions to make. So I would just stress that just because this may be approved today, we need to really look at it very, very closely over the next few months to see if it's really in line with what the council...
I fully agree, and again, we can't necessarily do everything in the parameters of each individual public meeting, so maybe an extra bit of work to be doing on this and reporting back to the board on that basis. Mr. Cotton.
Very briefly, Chair, just to reiterate that the door is always open to Councillor Bartlett or any other councillor who wants to know more about how the BDC works and how it's financially structured on this scheme or more in general. Give me a call and we'll arrange a meeting.
And can I say as well that this will go to full council as a scheme to be approved. It's just because it's a scheme for hundreds of millions of pounds that the preparation costs are quite significant, and that's what we are, the work is going into to get to the stage then it can then come to council.
Understandable. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the second of the two BDC-related items. The second is the Cotland Road and York Road Site Development Plan. Thank you very much. Councillor Howell. Apologies. Before we... thank you very much to both sets of ears that had that reminder there. We do have two items on this paper, those that are on public papers and some extra information which are on green papers. A reminder for members that don't know the difference between those. The green papers are non-public. Therefore, if I could suggest that we limit the discussion, certainly in the first instance, only to items which are on the white papers. If there is a feeling from members of the board that we do wish to discuss some of the further detail which are in the green papers, at that stage I'm quite happy to take a move to go below the line, which will exclude members of press and the public. So to start with, and obviously the same goes to you, Councillor Howell, I'm sure you know, if we can keep to the public papers to start with. Thank you very much.
Yes, Cotlands is an employment-led proposed development by BDC. The intention is to create a mixed scheme of employment, various bits of commercial and residential. And in order to achieve this, in terms of negotiation with particular investors, stroke occupiers, BDC needs to have some certainty as to the provision of car parking. And the solution to this is essentially to put two car parks, which the council owns in York Road, into the option agreement for BDC, and on one of those to build a multi-storey car park, which would serve the one-for-one public replacement of public car parking spaces that is required, and potentially other car parking needs. So this has got rather complicated, as you will have seen from the private document, but essentially we need to approve the transfer of these two car parks into the option agreement, and give officers an authority to basically move on forward with the commissioning development of the multi-storey car park, and to make an appropriate amendment to the capital programme as stated therein. I'm not sure, given the complexity of this, how you wish to proceed, Chair, but clearly we have the full range of officers in the room to be able to answer questions.
Thank you very much, and I think that's very useful as a start. So, colleagues, I think to start with, we've got essentially the strategy part in front of us, if you like, which is the recommendations in the public paper to include the two council-owned car parks into the option agreement, and the reasoning behind that. So I'd suggest exploring that, and if there were any other questions regarding the specifics, again, we can go behind the line then. Just for a change, we've got Councillor Bartlett and Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to keep these questions very simple. First question is, why are both the York Road car parking sites being transferred? What is the reason for both of them being transferred?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
I'll kick off and you sweep up.
Basically, it's to essentially we've got to have the space to replace the car parking on that's existing on Cotlands Road, and it's to retain the flexibility to provide further development or potentially more parking if required. So it's about flexibility.
Sorry, I mean, as I understand it, we need to build a multi-storey car park on one of the York Road sites in order to free up Cotlands Road. And that multi-storey car park, as it says in the report, plenty of capacity to handle not just the Cotlands Road car park, but other areas as well. That's what it says in the report. So what is the other York Road car park site being used for? What's the intention for that? And how does it relate to a dependency on Cotlands Road development?
As I said, you need to put both in to give you that flexibility in terms of the design of the car park, how it fits on the land, because the two car parks are next to each other. So we've got to go and do some more detailed design, and we might need one of the car parks and a bit of the other. You've then got some spare land if you need be to enhance the development, or to put further car parking in the longer term.
Yeah, I mean
Sorry, I understood that the York Road car parks are divorced from each other. They're further along. They're not adjacent to each other, are they?
They are. They're separated by a small strip.
So you're saying you may need to use both of those sites for the multi-storey car park, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But you don't know yet?
No, exactly.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
thanks. That's a good answer to that then. The next question is, with regard to the option about the ownership of the car park, one of the options I didn't see in there is why the council couldn't just choose a subcontractor, fund it, build it, and retain it. Why does it have to be transferred per se to the BDC in order to build it out? It's not an option that seems to be in the paper. That's all. In one that seemed to be a fairly obvious one to me.
Councillor Howell.
Yeah, I mean one of the issues is the council's availability to deliver, and whether the council has the expertise to build multi-storey car parks. I mean, judging from the ones that I see, we haven't done it for a while, and we have a partner that has access to the skills and experience to be able to do this well.
Yeah, but it does actually relate back to the issue about interest on money to put in and all this sort of thing, and how it's funded. And what I'm talking about is the option for a design and building construction contract as a standalone issue, and council per se would not actually manage or build it. It would be just overseeing it in the way that it does many other types of build projects. So there is obviously a perceived advantage of allowing this to go through BDC and hence Morgan Sindall. So there is obviously some logic to that, despite the potential costing options of it as well. So maybe you could just explain, why is that the preferred route?
Well, I'll let Bill in a second, but I would certainly question whether the council has the capabilities to take on a project in an area that has no experience before. I mean, it struggles to refit a paddling pool in the Hamworthy. So whether we can do that of a multi-storey car park, I have serious doubts, and it's a lot of money. It needs to be done properly.
Thinking about paddling pools or any other structures. It is about having a team in Morgan Sindall who can mobilise quickly, who can get on with it, but also with our own, jointly owned development company that the BCP Council owns half of, We've got an opportunity to work with the private sector, and for BDC, remember Morgan Sindel will be putting up significant amounts of money up front in this scheme in terms of all the planning and the pre-work, as we've discussed earlier on. Gives them some comfort that the thing actually will be developed and on time as well. So there's an element, retain an element of control.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Very similar to the last one. Firstly, very, very supportive. Secondly, I've got the ward wrong. It is entirely within Central Ward. The other point was just regarding the moving of the 2 car parks into the option agreement, which, and I understand completely the report said, and also your answer to Councillor Bartlett, that there is an advantage of that because it gives the certainty to BDC and to Morgan Stanley or MSIL as they go forward. So completely understood. However, and indeed it was something that we had approved in principle back as Bournemouth Council. However, the relationship between the council and BDC, to my mind, has been tarnished rather over the ill-conceived appeal on Durley Road car park. And I do wonder whether we should be treating them a little less as absolutely trustworthy partners, and one that we wish to support whatever happens because of what they did then. And as a result, I do wonder whether there are anything in the option agreement that is currently sitting in the option agreement which we would rather is not in the option agreement at this point. Because it may well be that there is an opportunity to do a quid pro quo and to be putting these 2 in to allow this development to go forward, which I'm very much in favour of, but at the same time to be getting the council out of any of the other sites that we would really rather, in retrospect, looking back 10 years, had not gone into that option agreement.
Councillor Howell.
Yeah, bringing up Durley Road is a bit odd because, you know, these schemes are originated not by the council working with Morgan Sindel in a development partnership. So they don't start off as schemes that, essentially, all the car parks were put in maybe by an administration of your colour. Maybe you weren't around when it actually was put in there, and then at a later date, the leader of the council of your colour and yourself, I think, objected to the building on one of those car parks, and there's a little bit of a contradiction there, I think, and maybe there's something to do with the fact that, you know, this is a long-term scheme, and that things can change over time, but you know, I think that the Durley Road scheme is kind of not relevant to this particular discussion. Bill, would you like to?
There was a specific question though, which is that if you are seeking approval to put new things into the option agreement, whether that is a suitable opportunity to look at in the whole, whether there are any particular things that you may want to take out of the agreement. It may well be that the answer is no, but
and if I may, Chairman, that was exactly the point, because in 2010, so many of those car parks went into the scheme. Had we, as a council, looked at that again 6 years later, then we probably would have said, you know what, we don't want Durley Road in there. So now I wonder whether there are other schemes in there that may be on, because as you absolutely correctly point out, Councillor Howell, things change things have changed over that decade. So maybe now is the opportunity to look at the remaining sites in the option and say, well, if we're looking at it now 10 years later, maybe we shouldn't have put that one in, and to use this as a quid pro quo.
To be honest, I agree with you, and I have made that point with regard to. I think are all car parks that are in the agreement subject to? Are they? Is it public or is it the one?
Yeah,
it is. So they. So it's always seemed to me a bit odd that the big hotel site was included in that. So that might offer us potential, but I think the advice I've had is that to engage in that kind of process would just be too difficult for our timeframes, wouldn't it?
If I can, hopefully just add quickly. Those things are always up for review, and if members have got particular, ideas, concepts that they want to push forward in terms of taking options, taking car parks out, I'm sure the portfolio holder will consider those ideas. Equally, if there are sites you want to inject in to do even more regeneration, I'm sure they'll be, up for listening to those ideas as well.
Thank you very much.
This is not at the end of the day. BDC was not our creation. It exists. It does good things, as far as I can see. It's something that we're taking forward, and I don't see it as a political thing, really. I mean, it's not something that we're going to be right about and you're going to be wrong about. It is. Well, I'm open to to coming forward and making suggestions like this. And as I said, I think that's a good suggestion, and it has been raised.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, BDC has been a very good thing. It's been great for the town centre, and we heard that from the bid earlier today, and I'm sure it will continue to be a very good thing. But this does give us an opportunity, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to bring it up, and would like you, please, to go away and look at whether there are items that should come out.
Yes, well, I'm happy to do so.
Right, thank you very much. Colleagues, I have, with the agreement of the next portfolio holder, agreed to move the last item for this Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting into the first item of the next Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting, which will give us a half-hour break. So unless there are any further comments on this particular item, I would like to thank the portfolio holder and officers for exploring that in detail. Again, perhaps there is...
Sorry, just want to check with the monitoring officer that we can do that.
Defer the item.
Bearing in mind it's a published agenda. Can we just check?
Okay, or we could take a half-hour break and then reconvene for the last bit and move directly onto the next bit, which is the same way of doing a different way of doing the same thing. So,
thanks, Chairman. That's almost certainly safer.
So we're not finishing this board meeting. We're having a half an hour adjournment until 6 o'clock, where we'll conclude this board meeting and move on to the next one. Thank you all very much for your time and patience. Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. In a change to advertise a schedule, we are not yet commencing the second of our two Overview and Scrutiny Board meetings today. We've had an adjournment. It's now 6 p.m. and we will be carrying on from the first of our board meetings, which commenced at 2 p.m, to consider the last item which we have on the agenda, which is item 10, which is the scrutiny of corporate-related Cabinet reports. Cabinet of the 12th of February 2020 will be considering the corporate strategy delivery plans. And then once this item finishes, we'll be having a momentary pause while we create a brand new board meeting for reasons that are well rehearsed but sometimes annoying. So I'll invite Councillor Slade up to the table. Thank you very much for joining us, and as per usual protocol, by all means introduce the item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. What a lovely afternoon it's been so far, eh? So I'm here to introduce the delivery plans item on the agenda, which are basically the next stage of the corporate strategy that was approved by Council last year. And if I refer you back to when that went through full Council, almost unanimously, everybody was very welcoming of it, but the comments that people were making was, well, where's the detail? So this is the detail. This is the bit that we've been waiting for. And we've also been working really hard to cross-reference the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals with our corporate strategy, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to align all 17 of them, and that we've arranged with comms that over the next 18 months, so we'll actually be releasing some information about how our corporate strategy aligns with those development goals as we move forward. So since the corporate strategy was adopted, we've been working with the service directors, operational directors, members of the cabinet to actually develop the detail behind each of the bullet points. So if you go back to the original corporate strategy that we approved, each section of the wheel had half a dozen items that then become the headlines, and what we've done is looked at what does that actually mean for people. So if we're talking about brighter futures, what are the key issues, and then under the key issues, how are we going to do that? So most of what you're seeing are the plans, the strategies and the actions that will come directly from the headline within each spoke of the wheel. And then from there, you've then got the measures of success that we'll then be using to address them. The other thing to raise is that we've added an additional spoke to the wheel, effectively, which is we recognised that there wasn't enough being said in the strategy about how the council would operate. And so we've added a page which is a modern, accessible and accountable council, which actually looks about how we look internally so that we can concentrate all of the others on how we work externally with our communities. I'm just trying to get the paper up in front of me because I've gone paperless, which slows everything down. There we go. So you'll see the first page is the already adopted strategy. You've then got an introduction which actually puts a little bit of narrative around how we've got there, and then the journey so far has allowed us to be able to focus each page on where we're going from here rather than being backward looking. The plans and actions that are in the plan, in the delivery plans, have been designed to be smart wherever possible. Most of them have got implementation and review dates, which we thought was really important, and it will also change over time, because those things that are going to be completed, for example, I'm looking at under Tackle the Climate Emergency, work with key partners to formulate a plan to encourage emission reduction measures by April 2020. Clearly that will fall off once that's been completed, and as directors and operational managers are tasked with new things through this budget and subsequent budgets, new things will come on. It's a living document. The measures of success have all been considered to make sure that we have the means to assess them, either using existing measures through our KPIs or our management information, or through developing new measures. And the intent is that these measures will begin in the new financial year. So for Q1 of the 2021, you'll start seeing the management information reflect these. There are some areas which will drag through that we're already being measured upon because they're statutory requirements, but this will sit alongside them. The other thing to mention is that because this has been developed with the corporate directors, service directors and heads of department with this, these items are all